Well, my co-chair is taking his seat. Why don't we call the meeting to order? And if I could ask Robin to call roll.
Okay, let's see. Right now, oh, there we go. All right, Heidi Emberling. Here. Len Philpott. Adrian Fine. Co-chair Dan Garber. Annette Glankoff. Here. Jennifer Hedderly. Hamilton Hitchings.
Here.
Co-chair Arthur Keller. Shawnee Kleinhaus. Lydia Koo. Steve Levy. Don McDougall. Whitney McNair. Julia Moran. Mark Nadeem. Bonnie Packer. Lisa Peshke-Cote. Doria Suma. Amy Sung. Jason Titus. Elaine Wang. Ellen Erbrock. Alex Van Riesen. Bob Winslow. Thank you.
We'll do oral communications. Now would be the time for anyone to speak that would like to speak to actually anything they like this evening. Do we have any cards? If you would like to speak, you should fill out a card, but don't let that stop you if you want to right now.
We have two cards. The first card is from Joanne Cultnow, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Hello, my name is Joanne Cultnow. I live in Evergreen Park, where I've lived for about 45 years. I'm new to this, and I only have one tiny comment. Ellen Erbach asked those of us in Avenues Village to take a look at the plan and the survey, and I looked at the plan online, and my comment is on the transportation map. And I think it looks pretty good, and the dimension that's missing is time. So we have all of these things, but it doesn't say that the train only goes once an hour on the weekends and once an hour in the middle of the day. And I didn't look for sure, but I don't think there's much connection in the various transportation options. So I've worked at home. I don't drive very much. I also walk, I use my bike, and I go to a couple of places, and I'm thinking about it. They're probably from my house in Evergreen Park to the JCC. I don't think there's a transit option. And I go to meetings at Stanford Hospital, and I drive, and there's the Marguerite, but it's not very convenient. So it's about time and convenience in relation to the transit map. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is?
Gabriel Lewis.
Hello, my name is Gabriel Lewis. I'm a resident just down the street, actually, but I'm also an intern for the Sierra Club, the Loma Prieta chapter, and I'm here to read a prepared statement from them. The Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter comprises 17,000 members in Santa Clara, San Mateo, and San Benito counties. Our chapter headquarters location is in Palo Alto, and this has given us a particular interest in various aspects of the city's planning process. Although the time has passed for comments on the draft transportation element, we do want to make a general comment that there is much to admire in the draft, but that we are puzzled by some aspects of it. We don't understand why there would be a further expenditure of staff planning time on BRT, as the City Council has been rather engaged on the topic. It has been thoroughly vetted by City staff, and the Council has adopted a unanimous position. It does not seem to be an efficient use of staff resources to be shoveling against the tide. and ferries. The San Mateo experience with low ridership and extraordinary deficits should be a sufficient deterrent without also considering the environmental mayhem that would be necessitated in order to construct a terminal. Constructing significant infrastructure at the water's edge is a form of climate denial, in addition. We apologize for the brevity of this comment, but time is short. We will try to compensate by commenting at greater length at the next public hearing. Best regards.
Thank you. And the last speaker is Penny Elson.
Thank you. I'm Penny Elson. I am speaking as an individual because the City School Traffic Safety Committee has not been invited to comment on this draft. So I'm commenting as an individual. Complete streets, also known as streets for all users, must be more than an affirmation in the comprehensive plan. That's a requirement if our bike-friendly application is to be successful. Our previous comp plan was very specific about what this meant. It provided a clear vision for safe routes to school that enabled the program subsequent to success. We require goals, policies, and programs built into the updated comprehensive plan transportation element specifically related to safe routes to school that will enable continued success, improving safety, and encouraging healthy, active, sustainable school commutes. I sent a number of written comments, so I'm not going to go through all those, but there's one that I want to particularly draw your attention to. On page T38, policy T2.11, continue to prioritize safety and comfort of school children in street modification projects. I'd like to add to this and development that affects school travel routes. We've had a lot of incidents where construction vehicles obstructed bike lanes and driveways that children use with their bicycles, pushing them out into traffic, and we'd like to address that. And on education, I don't know if it's necessary to put something this specific in, but we've been talking recently about adding a secondary school education element, teaching kids how to do group riding safely. We have large numbers now of kids that we never anticipated out on bikes. Kids find themselves in packs of 40 and 50 bicycles sometimes, and they need to learn some new skills about how to ride in a group like that safely so that they can share the road with other users without creating traffic obstructions and that sort of thing. And then finally, I want to point out that the City of Palo Alto City Council created a statement of policy related to the School Commute Corridors Network in 2003. And I'd like to see the language from that policy statement incorporated into the comprehensive plan. It basically prioritizes safety improvements to all schools within the designated City of Palo Alto School Commute Corridors Network. That policy was adopted by City Council on October 27th, 2003. And you can find the specific language in CMR 377:03. It's very important to have this in the comp plan. I don't think we can just fall back on language that says implement the bike plan. This is some very specific language, and I'd also like to add to that the policy statement says that we should be periodically updating our school commute corridors network as the city's development rolls out. Thank you for your time, and thanks for the great work y'all are doing here. Appreciate it.
With that, we don't have any more cards for from the public, so we will go to our item number 1, which are staff comments. Hillary.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. Jeremy's on his way. Actually, he was making last-minute copies at the office, but we expect to see him. And I was actually going to start by thanking him for all his work. You will have all heard by now that Jeremy is leaving us, effective on February 25th. And I just wanted to mention that what we're going to be doing in his absence, which will be difficult. First and foremost, we're going to be recruiting to fill his position on the staff and his role as the project manager for this project. In the interim, Elena and I are going to do what we can to keep the ship afloat, and I'm asking that all of you use Elena as your primary point of contact, and she and I will be in close communication and make sure that we continue to get deliverables out to you, and this process keeps going. If you know of anybody who's looking for a great planning job, send them our way too. We're going to be recruiting as soon as we can, as I said, to fill both of those roles. I wanted to also talk a little bit about the schedule and about the community services and facilities element. So just about the schedule, we're going to be discussing the schedule with the City Council on February 22nd. We do plan to communicate to the council this committee's desire to be engaged and involved on housing issues, as you articulated at one of your recent meetings. And we think that we will have an opportunity to talk to them about their desire for potentially more joint meetings with the CAC. We're also looking for their guidance on what happens after elements that you work on are presented to the council. And that gets to the subject of community services, which I want to talk about for a minute. But just before I do, I wanted to let you know that in addition to this meeting on February 22nd, before we all meet again as a group, the council's finance committee is having a presentation on the fiscal study that's been prepared about the draft EIR scenarios, and that's going to be on March 1st. If anybody's interested in that study, it'll be an opportunity for the committee to get a presentation from the consultants who prepared the study and ask questions. It might be a good use of your time if you like that kind of stuff. We also have never grappled with the subject of whether this committee would like to hold a hearing on the draft EIR. I hope by now you all have either gotten a hard copy or at least a link to the electronic copy. Oh, I see it, the big gigantic book over there. We obviously want the committee's comments on this draft. It's a draft because it's intended to get better through the submission of public comments. So the choices are, one, to submit comments at a public hearing at one of the boards and commissions or the council when they held a hearing, or for this group itself to actually set aside time on an agenda to have a hearing and allow everybody to submit written or oral comments. So I'm posing that as a question. It doesn't have to be resolved right this minute, but maybe before our next meeting we can determine whether you want to hold a hearing or whether you want to just submit comments at someone else's hearing at the Planning Commission or at the council. We're still scheduling those other meetings. So maybe let me know if you have strong preferences, and Jeremy and I will work with the co-chairs to try and fit it into your schedule if that's your preference. Okay, getting to community services and facility. First, let me say congratulations to the subcommittee and to the CAC as a whole. If you remember, this was that first element that we kind of got started working on before all the wheels were turning in the direction they are now. The committee as a whole gave pretty clear direction to the subcommittee, and then the subcommittee worked diligently on a work product that was presented to the council last week. I think just generalizing the council's comments, they were incredibly grateful and appreciative of the work that went into it. I think they thought on the whole the quality of the work was fantastic. They did have a number of comments, which I think it would be good for us to address in revisions. Principally, the comments were about tightening up the language, dealing a little bit dealing with some of the redundancies and just some of the, we sort of, I guess, we used the big tent approach to this element. We kind of like, someone had a good idea and we put it in. Someone had another good idea, we put that in too. And I think what the council would like us to do now, and I'm suggesting that the subcommittee reconvene to do this, is look at the whole thing we've created and try and sort it a little and get rid of any redundancies, consolidate where possible. The other thing that they wanted and clearly stated, at least some of the council members, is that they'd like some flexibility when it comes to the programs. In this element, we made an effort to be very assertive and use action verbs like do this, do that. I think that's okay for some programs, you know, the ones that are the most important or most meaningful to us, but On the whole, I think the council would appreciate a little more flexibility, so consider doing this, evaluate this, so that they have an opportunity to prioritize and to implement these programs as resources permit. So there was by no means unanimity on the council on that point, but I think they're asking us to take another look at the programs, consolidate and eliminate redundancies where we can, and inject this idea of flexibility in some of the programs. So as I said, I think the staff's recommendation is that the subcommittee get back together again, review what the council provided in terms of specific direction and these overarching issues, and develop a revised draft. Beyond that, I guess my question for the group is whether the group, the whole CAC, would like to see the work product of, well, first of all, is the subcommittee okay with that? I mean, are you guys willing to reconvene and take that on with staff's support? And secondly, once the subcommittee completes their effort, does the whole CAC wish to review the revised draft and make another recommendation to the council? And if so, would you be interested in holding a special meeting for that purpose? So it would be a second meeting in a month. Hopefully it would be shorter than one of your normal meetings, but it would give you an opportunity as a whole to come together and see how the subcommittee had revised things, and potentially to help prioritize. We were actually, Dan and Arthur and I were talking about maybe there could be an exercise where you would give the council your feedback on prioritizing among the policies at that meeting. So this isn't supposed to be a long agenda item, but I was hoping Dan and Arthur, we could entertain some comments and questions on these topics, and get a sense of whether the committee would, first, whether the subcommittee is interested in reconvening to do the editing, and two, whether the committee, the whole CAC, would like to see the element again.
Anybody want to weigh in on the committee who's a member of the Community Services Committee that wants to weigh in about how to handle that? Len, I think you want to.
Yeah, well, I'm on the subcommittee, and to answer your one question, I'm definitely willing to take another go at it. I did have another question, kind of looking for guidance, because I've seen this issue arise not just in our subcommittee hearing, but in larger committee meetings. And I think that it's a general question that may be hanging out there. And that is the issue of cost, potential cost of some of the programs and policies that are recommended. It's been my experience in the subcommittee that if someone had a good idea, this is the place for it. It's a brainstorming, creative kind of session. Let's put it in. The time for hatcheting and axing and editing things out comes later. But that these aren't necessarily, the citizen input is not the time to put the green eye shade on and do an accounting. We don't have the kind of information we need for that. I don't know what headcount costs and benefits. When I ran a business, I certainly knew how much we paid for those things, but I could only speculate. So when we find ourselves in this subcommittee and other subcommittees, and we hear council members questioning cost, can you give us guidance on whether we should be concerned with that at this point in the process, or is that something that I would argue might be more effectively handled later on?
Thanks for that question, Len. I guess I would agree with you that later in the process, when we have an understanding of the full suite of programs that we're going to recommend in all of the elements, is the best time to do a prioritization and evaluation of cost. In a general plan update like this, what I've seen done is not a lot more than kind of high, medium, and low costs when you look at all the programs together. So you evaluate them against each other and you determine which are least costly and which are most costly. But you're right, we don't have the tools with which to do that now. So I think that would be best deferred, and if we just follow the council's lead and their direction and inject a little flexibility, so the most costly items could potentially be deferred if the resources aren't there, that will be sufficient for now.
That sounds great, thanks. So then my proposal to get the elephants in the children's zoo is back on the table? Just joking.
Elaine?
Hello? Oh, I'm not on the subcommittee, but I just want to express my thoughts on whether or not we meet. And my sense is probably not. I think that I trust the subcommittee to evaluate what the council's comments were. It would be great if we have the opportunity to review and provide comments back to staff, but I don't think we need a separate meeting for it.
So,
On?
thank you, Arthur. So if I can find my papers and step back a bit, what did I do with it? So the first thing to comment on Hillary's comments, if I can, and I'm going to make some comments about council. I asked Dan, is this being recorded or not? And I want to make some comments that I think are pretty specific, but I think they're informative relative to what we should do with others. So council commented a lot on the narrative. And the biggest thing, and I agree with Hillary, that they said was shorten the narrative. And I think that makes sense. They were certainly aware of details. They wanted the Bigsby part to be put in as open space, not as just general park. We got advice of things like, don't say disabilities. Now some of these things, I bring this up because that's a comment that I disagree with, because the speakers that have come here to speak about disabilities have all used the word disabilities, and to find some other softer word doesn't, I think, help us really address the issue. They did make a really good point, which I think is really important relative to transportation and all the other elements, and I've talked about it before, which is we need to establish basic assumptions of population growth and population and segmentation. We've been in this conversation already, that do we really want to use the school board numbers, or do we want to use our numbers, or do we want to use some other numbers? And I think we need to establish what numbers we're using and what the scenarios might be based on those different numbers. Questions they asked about all of the programs were interesting. They wanted, basically, in the end, a side-by-side comparison of the 15-year-old comp plan and this comp plan. I don't think that that's reasonable at all. I do think the question of what's been removed is a reasonable question that we could address. They did talk about language, and I won't talk more about that. But to get away from that and to go to some of the other comments, they basically said, we want all the programs to be wishy-washy. That was the word they used. We don't want you telling us what we should do, and we just want them to be wishy-washy. Just make general statements and consider and evaluate and whatever. And frankly, that's something I've objected to right from the start, because that says if it's evaluate or consider, you can say, I think about this for 30 seconds and I thought about it, it was considered, check it off the list, and now it's done. And I think there needs to be some compromise, that yes, there needs to be some things that are considered. I think there's some things that if the CAC feels strongly about, quite frankly, we should state them strongly. We're sitting here, we just listened to several speakers. We heard those speakers with passion talk about things they believed in. And I don't think that we should take input from some of these guest speakers and say, well, thank you very much, you're very passionate about that. Now we're going to rewrite that so it sounds really wishy-washy. I don't think that that's right, and I don't think we should do it. You did talk, Hillary, about the fact we were going to go back, and I know Jeremy talked about this at the beginning of that presentation. We're here asking for guidance. That is an open-ended question that doesn't get an answer. We found out. We tried. I think if we want guidance, we should ask a question. Is it this or is it that or whatever? Guidance to other subcommittees, and I totally support what Len said. Let's get back to this subcommittee and clean this up. I believe that the subcommittee acted on a direction that we either created ourselves or were told, I can't remember, that said, our job is to make sure that every comment was ever made in the CAC was included in the element. We were to make sure that nothing got left out. I think a subcommittee should be chartered to consider everything that was said, decide on the things that are important enough to be included, and maybe annotate the things that didn't get included so they could be debated later. But the strategy we took was to try and make sure, did we remember everything? And I think that did not do that element well. In terms of prioritize, I did create this spreadsheet that you know that everybody has, that took all of the elements. It created a priority in terms of what we thought they should be, high, medium, and low. It created a cost, high, low, medium, and it put down what verb was used. Did we say establish or explore or whatever, so that we can go back and do that. I think the best we can do in terms of cost, but I think we should do it, is guess. Is it a high, medium, and low cost? Is it building an overpass, which is going to be high, or is it running a survey, which is going to be low? And I think that would allow us to go back to the CAC here, and even to council, with some of what I think they're looking for, which is some amount of disagreement. We could go back to them and say, we really like these things, but we think the cost is too high. Do you want them in or do you want them out? That would be a way for us to approach council. Thank you.
I think Bonnie was next.
Yeah, I agree with what, I agree with what Don said about the council's direction, and well, it wasn't clear direction, but concern about our strong language versus wishy-washy language. And when I heard some of the council members say that, I felt like the wind was taken out of our sails. You know, we're here, we're working really hard, we have all these meetings, and we come to an agreement about certain words, and then we go to city council and they say, that's nice, thank you for all your hard work, but we're going to write it the way we want to write it. So that's a little disconcerting for me, and I don't know how the others feel. But as a subcommittee member, I'm happy to look at the draft again, and we'll do our best to let city council know that we're doing our best to let them know how the community feels. And you know, we elected them, and I hope they listen.
Lydia, and then Heidi.
Actually, I would like to ask for your indulgence on a matter, if you could put me on after this with regards to process and also the Brown Act. So I'd like to discuss that a little bit, but if you could put me on later. In terms of this question, I'm more than happy to come back as a subcommittee member for the community services element.
Thank you. Heidi?
I'm also happy to come back and look at the community services element. Yeah, where to go from here? I think, you know, this is a very tough process. This is a very messy process. And although we're talking about specific ideas, I do think there is overlap, not only within an element, but across elements. I mean, it would be nice if the city council said, you know, we want 10 policies and no more per section or something. I mean, there's no guidance in terms of limits or structure or how we organize. We spent some of our last subcommittee meeting talking about organization, and I see it's on the agenda tonight to talk about potential reorganization. So how will this document be used? Who's reading it? Who's using it? what makes it usable, I think is an important question to ask before we finalize any of the sections, really.
Thank you. I think that Shani, you want to talk, and then we're going to cut off because we need to move on. My request is that you leave your tags vertical until you've spoken, so that we don't miss you. But I don't want to keep on going on this topic too long.
Okay,
Shani?
thank you. So I attended the city council meeting and listened to what they had to say, and the question of how our language, how strong it should be, and how prescriptive versus a more general one, as well as the issue of having everything that anyone ever suggested actually making into the plan, and how do you thin it out. And I think there's a certain problem when we don't actually have a lot of discussion on something that is very prescriptive, and that's a point towards doing things that are more fuzzy or wishy-washy, as the council said. If we are saying conduct a study, that's very strong. That has a lot of implications. That's something that somebody had, they want that study. It doesn't mean that we all do, and we didn't really have a chance to have any type of conversation about any of this in deep. It's just like, okay, here are a few things. So, and generally, the general plan or the comprehensive plan doesn't have to be as prescriptive as conduct a study. Consider a study, think about a study, or develop an ordinance. That's really, really strong language, and we have things like that in here. So I think that the more fuzzy language is the right way to go in general, although there may be some things that we feel strongly about, but that has to be, to some extent, a consensus when you have something that is very prescriptive. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to say that I think that calling it wishy-washy language, I'm not sure where that phrase comes from, but I think, I'm not sure whose phrase that is, but I think that the idea is that with a number of programs, some flexibility in terms of prioritization comes from using some sort of words that are not, we're going to do exactly this, and I agree with Shani that studying something is more than simply considering, and then we can put in language like that. I also think that perhaps we could have been better in terms of understanding what happens. We were hoping that there would be some way of having consensus where things would have to have more than one person's support to get in. So some of those things will be pruned. I'm going to suggest a process way of handling this. I'm going to suggest that the subcommittee do some work over the next few weeks trying to consolidate this, figure out things which didn't seem to make sense, didn't seem to have support based on people's multiple levels of support, or seem pretty obvious, seem a little bit more controversial, and then pull those out for additional questions. We have an opportunity when this comes back to us. It can come back technically on consent, which would allow the document to be distributed to all the members of the committee, allow us to provide feedback, which can then go to the subcommittee and still be within the Brown Act. So I would suggest that we handle that. We don't necessarily have to take time at the meeting to handle that, but by giving things in writing and having it be an agenda item, it allows us to move forward and give feedback to the committee. So I'd like staff to consider that. Thank you.
Everybody, I think I got what I needed out of that, and thanks again to the subcommittee. We'll work to schedule another meeting with you as soon as we can.
Okay, so we should be timing these things. We should have timed the last thing because we're now at 6:10, 6:08. So can we time 2 minutes for the future comments from here on? Lydia, I think you had a quick thing to cover.
So I actually wanted to find out from Hillary, Jeremy, and the co-chairs in terms of how much of how far can we go with things like blogs and opinions on articles? When does it violate the Brown Act, and how selective and how minute can the message be in terms of blogs and public opinion and so forth?
I'm happy to try. It's not black and white. I mean, this is the struggle and the challenge with this. There isn't. There isn't a line where we can say you've just crossed that line necessarily. There are areas that we know are not an issue whatsoever, and there's other areas that I'm pretty clear that if you went out and blogged and said, next week at the CNC, I'm going to talk about this, that's a serial meeting, and you should not be doing that. So what the tact we've taken, and I think the tact that our council has taken, is to inform you of the fuzziness, inform you of the grayness of that, let you know that there potentially could be issues. They're not going to be issues that are necessarily generated by us. It could be a community member coming forward and saying, I didn't like that, and then we've got to opine at some point. We've tried to get specific where we can, but I don't know that that's particularly responsible of us, because this is not really settled law. It's very challenging. So the way that I've approached it with those members of the CEC who come to me, I've just said, these are the areas that I think you have a real problem. There's a certain set of areas that I wouldn't even worry about it, and there's a bunch of stuff in the middle that if I gave you my opinion, it's not a legal opinion. Don't listen to me, because I don't know what that is. And I think that our legal staff has somewhat said something similar. We don't know exactly what it looks like, so we want people to be careful.
There's a lot of wishy-washy things here, all over. But in any case, I guess, I just want to mention there's 24 of us here in this committee, 25 before. And the thing is, we took out personal time from work, from family, and from things we enjoy in order to be here. So the last thing I want to do is to find out at a later date that this committee has been compromised or our decisions have been compromised. So it would be really prudent for you to find out from the city attorney where is the line. And I don't want to hear the gray stuff, because that does not help us move into a good direction. I just want that to be noted.
Lydia, if I could interject, just add a thought to Jeremy's. This is really a topic that I would prefer to address in writing. So I would encourage anyone who has a question to the staff on this particular issue, the Brown Act, and how we're going to operate in this space, to send us a question in writing, and we'll respond. If we think it's something that everyone will be interested in, we'll respond to the whole group.
Right.
So
I think that it's something that we all need to know and adhere to. I would be happy to write a blog and talk to people about where they're coming from, but I've refrained myself because of instructions.
Understood.
So I just want to put that out there, and I think most of us here would want to know where we stand if we do something. And I think it's something everybody needs to know.
Thank you. Just for the record, I was actually offered to write a blog for Palo Alto Online, but I didn't feel that because I'm co-chair of the CAC, I didn't feel it was appropriate for me to do that, so I respectfully declined.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to start off with members of the Transportation Subcommittee who will go and kick us off. So you have the list, I believe?
Lydia, do you want to go first? Or if you have anything to say, otherwise we can go directly to Mark.
No, I wasn't on the meeting.
Okay.
I wasn't at the meeting, I'm sorry, I had to work. It was in the middle of the day.
Hate that.
I hate that.
Mark, did you have comments?
Yeah, for the February 3rd subcommittee meeting, there were two items that were brought up I thought were already discussed in the CAC meeting of January 26. And the members have already made their opinions, which are clear. These two items were the ferry service. And so at the general meeting, nobody had supported the ferry service, so I don't know why it came back in the subcommittee meeting. The second item was the airport. Again, majority has supported the airport, but we ended up spending a significant time discussing the airport at the subcommittee meeting. Then there was we discussed the narrative that the 26 pages before the draft of the document. And we suggested that there would be, about 3 to 5 pages of narrative rather than the 26. But again, the latest draft, the reduction in number of pages was minimal or kind of cosmetic. That's basically my take on the meeting.
Thank you. Ellen, did you have comments?
I listened to the city council meeting comments, and I completely concur that the narrative has to be cut drastically and really cut in detail and be almost just an index of what the goals are. And the goals that interest me most actually was goal 6, which has to do with seniors and with people with special needs. And I studied that one over with great interest, and I have come to the thought that is not wishy-washy at all, but it is that the Palo Alto shuttle fleet needs to be transferred to use for school children only, and Palo Alto needs a new fleet of buses for the adult market and seniors. The enclosed in your at place things are a picture I took of the shuttle at the corner of Homer and Webster, and it is a wonderful, complete illustration, not complete perhaps, of what's wrong with the shuttle for seniors and for any handicapped. First place, the shuttle stop is on the corner with on the stop sign, on the pole of the stop sign. When I first moved there, I asked, where does the shuttle stop? Nobody could tell me. Well, it's out there. There's no seat. There's no nothing. There is parking all the way up on the street. You can't see a bus coming without standing in the middle of the street. And that's how you hail it down. And then it stops there in the lane, on a one-way street, and you hobble out to it, and a handicapped person, with perhaps the exception of Bonnie, who claims she was able to climb on it with a broken arm, really can't get on the bus. It is very awkward now, and wheelchairs are out. It's not ADA friendly at all. Most of the traffic in the midday on that shuttle is coming downtown, and I think that's fine. But then that shuttle turns right in the middle of the traffic too, and I think that we need we need to be at least as good buses as they have for the Margarita and for the Google Mountain View buses for the public, which gets pretty high readership. So that's my not wishy comment, and it'll cost money because it needs a new fleet of buses.
Thank you. I'm going to interrupt just briefly because we didn't give Jeremy a chance to introduce a member of their the city's transportation staff.
It's actually 2 people. Just want to make sure that is here. Jessica, wave, and then Sylvia in the back. Since Safe Routes for Schools, they're here. They've been part of our team internally looking at the draft comp plan. Have provided us with some of their comments, and we're feeding their comments back into the draft. Just wanted to make sure you knew they're here and they can answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Don, Julia, Bonnie, Lisa, Jason, and then we'll continue around the table. Bob, sorry, did I miss you? So you're next, Don.
Microphone.
I know. I haven't gotten through all the subcommittee. You're a W.
Between Elena and I, we agreed to submit my 4 pages of things to the subcommittee and not to the whole thing. I have, in my interest area, I focused on the parking, the segment 4, the vehicle parking and the bike parking, and I did the same thing I did with the services. created a matrix, and I do that so I can think about it. It's not, I don't pretend that it's right or wrong or whatever. I put down what the verb was, consistent with what Shawnee was saying, we could look for where the right kind of verb is and the right kind of action is. I put a guess at dollars, and I put in also what the policy was in the old document. But then the other thing I did was I looked at that and said, the most important thing that we're talking about right now in council, and that was at the offsite that they had here, was congestion, and everything's about congestion. And the question about parking is, if you have more or less parking, do you improve or worsen congestion? And if you take all of the policies that we have that are in that list, and I don't pretend this is right, I just pretend that it deserves discussion, that those policies fall in different quadrants relative to whether they provide more parking and decrease congestion, or they provide more parking and increase congestion. There are contradictory policies within that. Relative to subcommittees, and the other thing, I want to quickly say two things. One is, there were some council members who basically separately said back to me, we don't agree with the wishy-washy request. You can use whatever verbs you want, number one. Number two, in terms of Brown Act, the other thing that is true is that if we wanted to have a ad hoc committee that was to discuss just this element or just this goal, we could say, let's meet at Don's house, 3 or 4 of us. We don't have to document it or whatever, and we could have a good discussion of these things and then come back. That's not a Brown Act violation. Brown Act is mostly secret meetings of majorities, or secret meetings that result in chain communication. And I would welcome people saying, hey, let's get together and discuss the parking with this approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Julia, Bonnie, Lisa.
Okay, so in the staff report, the staff described pretty much what happened at the subcommittee, the transportation subcommittee. We spent a lot of time talking about park or not to park, and I'm sure later this evening we'll be talking a lot more about the parking issue. The other thing that happened at the subcommittee, and this is sitting at your table, is that before the meeting met, that morning I put together this little chart, and I presented it to the subcommittee, and that's at your places. And it was a way for me to think about all the ideas that were in the draft element that we were asked to look at. And so that people on the subcommittee seem to like this organization and the way it put the thoughts together, and it reinforced my idea, and I hope others of you think that too, that there's a lot of good ideas in the element, but if it was reorganized better, then we can see how they all interrelate. So there was a motion the city council made back in August that said, add a new goal called traffic congestion, which staff did, and that's been in there, and it has a lot of good policies and programs in there, but they repeat a lot of the stuff that's in Goal T1, Goal T2, and so the suggestion was to put it all together so we can see how all these things work together. Our goals are to reduce greenhouse gases, to reduce traffic congestion, to reduce bad traffic impact on neighborhoods, and to have safe streets. To do that, we reduce the reliance on single occupancy vehicles. And in order to do that, there are all those policies. How do we get there? There's transit, maybe there's parking fees, I don't know if that'll work, all kinds of ideas, and that's how we get to those goals. So we talked about that, and I hope that we can talk about it here somewhat to see how far can we go in this element to change the structure a little bit, even though staff is interpreting the guidance from council as to dictating structure. But if we can suggest a better structure that reinforces their goals, can't we do that? That's what I'm asking this committee to weigh in on today as well, because we did discuss it in the subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Does everybody have a copy of Bonnie's handout? Yeah. Okay, just checking. Lisa and then Jason.
So first of all, I thought it was a really good job by the subcommittee, and also a very good job of just incorporating what all our comments were, of course with your judgment added to it. On the specific, right now we're on the 2 minutes on the specifics, right, of what the subcommittee asked for, right? Yeah, okay. That as far as the parking, I actually agree to this approach that's outlined by the subcommittee here in the cover note. I think that's the right thing. I think we're doing the demand. We deal with the demand at the same time we're dealing with how do we get rid of some of the need for the parking and such. I think that what we would need to add to that would be some other thoughts that we've all raised around housing by the transit and technology around, you know, parking technology like available spaces, that kind of, I would just add a few things, but I agree with the general approach that the subcommittee was taking. I also very much agree on deleting the ferry to the Baylands, and I'm fine with the airport part. In going through the broader, you know, the comments that I think are not yet quite in there is, and it touches on what a couple other folks mentioned, is I still think we should do some prioritization here of identifying, it goes to the layout of the plan, but it also goes to, I don't think we'll do everything. And if we could, the subcommittee maybe, and then the CAC could say, these 10 things, 10 programs or 10 things are the most important to do. I think you've kind of highlighted some of that, Dan, in your comments. I think that would be a good thing for us to do. And then going to the shuttle, similar questions, kind of what do we need for the shuttle? I still feel like there's not quite enough there that meets all the needs, and so I would add that. And that was really the important, oh, then a minor one was in one of the programs later, but I think we're doing that later, right? This was more at the top level. I'm done.
Jason, Bob, Elaine.
Be brief because I also was wasn't able to make the subcommittee meeting, but just I thought the edits overall looked really good. They seemed to capture a lot of the feedback. One area where I felt we had still kind of not captured it was around saying, you know, yes, we should in program T1.8.1. We said, yeah, we should gather data and analyze usage. I think we should actually explicitly say and make that publicly available. I think that is how, certainly in this area, I think a lot of useful things will come out of it if we can make that available. People who care can go in and analyze it for different kinds of purposes and then end up making the kinds of doing analysis that the city wouldn't have done otherwise. And I will pass the rest of the time on.
Bob and then Elaine.
Now it's on. Thank you. I want to make my comments towards the airport. I found that in some respects the minutes of the meeting didn't adequately capture some of the narrative that happened at the subcommittee. One element that I recall we spoke about was having a program related to the expansion of the terminal or the movement of the terminal be deleted. We talked a lot about the use of an airport master plan and didn't feel that the comp plan needed to be so specific to kind of outpace what the master plan might do. Another area that was discussed but doesn't seem to come up directly enough was the community-wide concern associated with noise at the airport. I feel that there's strong sentiment in the community around noise. One program that I believe I spoke to was the addition of additional noise monitoring around the airport. I would, ask, and I've written, just some comments in, but that we consider noise monitoring. There was an additional suggestion that and I don't think the minutes are supposed to be per se verbatim, but I spoke about low-flying aircraft west of Bayshore from Palo Alto Airport, perhaps a 1,200-foot ceiling, and the consideration of a policy statement related to trying to limit low-flying aircraft, other than, I'm certain when there are emergency situations. Finally, there was an observation, I think, that occurred there that basically said, what's the airport doing in the transportation section anyways? And if you look at if you spend a moment to read the vision of the transportation element, the airport, while it might be vital for emergency services perhaps, it's not vital for transportation and anything that has to do with transportation. And frankly, most of the policies are associated with environmental impact of the airport. So it's not in our purview, but it is a question that perhaps could go to council going, why is it there? So those are some comments.
Thanks, Elaine, and then we'll start, we'll break briefly for Jeremy, and then we'll go around the table.
So for the Transportation Subcommittee, I just wanted to make one comment about parking and then one comment about the reorganization. On parking, I mean, you've read the conclusion that we came to about managing demand. And I also wanted to point out that in the DEIR, there were two mitigation measures, Trans 1A and Trans 1B, on page 4.13-51. And I think those are worth looking back at because they kind of directly relate to tools that we can use to better manage parking inflow, managing future demand, managing existing supply, and that type of thing. So the challenge that I have with policies T 4.1 and 4.2 is that it may actually, while it might provide parking for future developments, it actually might even also induce demand for future developments, and that's, according to Don's diagram, not a good thing. We don't want to, we want to be in sync with sustainable transportation, not in conflict. But the mitigation measures noted in the DEIR are actually the better tools to think about, because much of the parking problems that we see in downtown Cal Ave, where there's a lot of overflow onto the streets and commuter access, is because there's a lot of buildings that just never had parking. Most of our downtown core was built in 1890, 1920, 1930. They didn't have parking, and a lot of the extra usage of those structures still don't have places to go. So mitigation measures Trans 1A really focuses on trip caps and requiring development projects to work with transportation demand management. And they have actually very specific percentage reductions in SOV for the downtown district, the Cal Ave area, Stanford Research Park, El Camino. I really urge you guys to take a look at those mitigation measures, and I would love to find our group as a whole, we should weave that back into the element. And then also one note about unbundling parking. In the narrative, we talk about unbundling residential parking. I think it's important to note we should be unbundling commercial parking. The challenge Palo Alto has, which is different from what you cite a Portland article about, time's up, but unbundling commercial parking.
Jeremy?
Thanks. I just want to make a few comments on some of the things that I heard. And first of all, I wanted to say thank you to Elena for running what by every indication was a great set of subcommittee meetings. So thank you for all the work that you did on that. To Don's comments on subcommittees, whatever we want to call them, we're not able to tell you not to meet. If a group of people want to get together and have conversations, they're going to do that. Early in this process, I had intimated that the reason that things may have gotten derailed earlier on when the PTC was doing its work was the concern that a lot of work happened during non-publicly accessible subcommittee meetings. So we made a concerted effort here to ensure as much as possible that everything was out in the open, available, that the public could participate. So certainly if one or two people are getting together for coffee and talking about things, there's nothing wrong with that. We're not going to tell you not to do those kinds of things, but just be very, we want people to be very aware. That was the understanding that we had, and that's what we're trying to protect the work from. So if people do decide to do that, just understand that that might be a criticism that comes along, and we'll have to subsequently deal with that. I'm just being blunt about it. Related to prioritization, I mean, I think this is a very good point, and I want to be, I should have been clearer up front. We have this part of the comp plan called the implementation plan. And if you haven't seen it in the existing comp plan, it's literally a list of all of the policies and programs with dates and when we're going to do that work. So there is work that this group will do related to prioritization or implementation, whatever you want to call it, but it makes the most sense for that to occur at the end of this process when you've seen all of that work done, and that's what we're recommending. So certainly the subcommittees could take a look at it, but I'd hate for the subcommittees to get embroiled in implementation without doing the work related to the actual plan. So implementation is coming. That is something that we want you to participate in. We expect multiple meetings related to that. So I think there's a lot of good work to do there. Finally, another set of comments that Don made that I couldn't help to chuckle. That the Community Services Subcommittee did some extraordinary work, and I think it's a product that the CAC should be proud of, and I'm very appreciative of the council's set of comments back, even though it wasn't in the form of a motion. We heard a lot of different things from them, and that will be helpful moving forward. And it was challenged this first go-around to really understand how we were going to deal with the whole set of comments that came from everyone. We went through this round with not a matrix. We provided a matrix. That's been a lot of work, as I've suggested in the past. I do think that the subcommittee actually did a fairly good job concentrating on certain potential policies and programs, and other ones did not make the final cut. But we do run the risk of these elements becoming a repository for everybody's comments and getting into that kind of dialogue here. And that, we've got to think about the bigger project here and the greater good here, which is to produce a comp plan that is worthy of Palo Alto and something that can go back to the council and that they can discuss and debate, which is their prerogative. So we do our best from the staff perspective to suggest why certain things weren't in. We encourage this group wholeheartedly to get into that debate. But we want to be careful about how the expectation that any individual CAC member has related to every single comment they're going to make. They're not all going to make the cut. That's something that staff gets to do. That's something the subcommittee gets to do. So I don't want to go down that road too far, because then we get stuck in those sets of conversations, which I think could be very, very cumbersome. So I just wanted to throw it out. I think the subcommittee did an extraordinarily good job making sure that the best comments from this group were included, and the ones that didn't meet a minimum were not part of it. And that's exactly what they were supposed to do. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go first, as opposed to last.
Mixing it up.
And then we'll go to my left, and Amy will go next. First, a couple of comments about the City Council. I heard three things that night as they were discussing the community services element. One, to make the language of the programs more flexible. I'll use that word as my co-chair has. Two, to streamline the narrative, policies, and programs. As one of the council members put it, it's a lot easier to add stuff than it is to take away, but they are looking for us to take things away. They're looking for the editing piece. Three, and to help them prioritize the programs. So we've got some ideas about how we can, as a group, can do the prioritization, But the other important piece is that, as Len or Don was thinking, had mentioned, is I think what this really does is it tasks the subcommittees with more editing. I think in general the perception I came away is that the council is looking for us to do more, not less, on all of these topics. To that end, and more cumbersome perhaps, I've had mentioned talking about editing the last time we all met here, and I have taken a first pass as a series of suggestions to the subcommittee regarding the language that you have at places. I've got a couple of copies if you need it. What I've tried to do was go through to reduce wordiness. We often bury our lead in the actual text. I was trying to find ways to consolidate policies and programs or revise policies that were so specific they didn't allow for reasonable flexibility going into the future. And or removing policies and programs that were better enacted as zoning standards or other things or belong in other elements. Finally, the comp plan will be referencing the other master and other plans of the city to become part of it. And so I've also taken out a lot of references to the other plans, except, and I couldn't get all of them, but many of those other plans, which are subordinate to the comp plan, reference policies in the comp plan. And so those policies that are tied back to the comp plan, we have to be careful about sustaining. I'll talk more later. Thank you. Amy.
Well, first of all, I read this transportation draft, and I was very, very impressed. I thought that was very clearly organized, and so I looked at each subsections, and I was very pleased to find out that with our transportation, that a lot of thought has been put in about the convenient to use and reliability. I mean, the reliable of the transportation, and that is on top of the safety and efficiency. So I was very pleased to see that. As far as the parking, I thought that that occupied almost the centerpiece of this transportation. And when I looked at this transportation elements, you know, it talks about the completed streets, expressways, freeways, transit walking, bicycling, parking, special transportation needs, and aviation. And so that looks like that we are trying to solve today's problem in the plan that we think that will be continue to be useful for the years to come. Regarding the special needs section, I see that Don was talking about that the word of disabilities, and I happen to believe that it is best to keep the word disabilities. That is the word that American Disability Act is based on, and I would you know, use that. As far as the reducing the reliance on the single vehicles, I continue to hold out my hope that the self-drive autos is just in the near future. I do wanted to talk about something that is less focus is the railroad corridor. I am very much in favor of this great separation, and I also like to see that while the Caltrain is in the process of electrifying, the noise reduction is also important. And can I also touch upon the airport? I do not really understand very much about the airport, but I do not understand why that we wanted to limit it to only one runway. You know, it shall remain only one. And just like, you know, how do we account for the future growth? Thank you.
Thank you. Whitney?
Thank you.
I wanted to follow the staff report and just focus tonight on parking. And Bonnie, I wanted to thank you for this flow chart. I found that really helpful to try and understand what the comp plan, the main focus of the comp plan was trying to say about those particular things. I already, at the last meeting, talked about my position regarding the ability to require TDM measures. I'm not going to go into that again. But I was a little confused what the comp plan was trying to say about parking. So in the staff report, it says strategies to reduce the demand should be incorporated over time. And I'm not quite sure what that means. Policy T49 says it encourages the use of adaptive design strategies in new parking facilities in order to facilitate reuse in the future and when conditions warrant. I'm not quite sure what that means either. It's kind of land banking some parking. But there's also a policy that encourages below grade or structured parking. Those aren't really suitable for reuse. So those two things to me are a little bit in conflict. And then there's also a policy T423, which is consider updating parking standards for non-residential uses to better reflect occupancy and employee density. And I just want to caution, is really difficult to regulate employee density. So, I mean, if the issue is trying not to have parking within the surrounding neighborhood, I understand that. I get that position. But there's also a lot of discussion around reducing trips, and in particular, drive-alone trips. But if you have a lot of policies in there that encourage ample parking at the door of the building where you work, it really flies directly in the face of getting people out of their cars and into alternative means. So there's just a balance. And I'm not quite sure the comp plan has quite settled on what that balance is going to be.
If I can make a quick comment to that, I appreciate those comments. I think this is the most challenging section that we've encountered at this point in the process. We were trying to find a balance between recognizing the short-term parking needs of the city while also looking at the long-term plans the city has around reducing SOV trips, and completely appreciate that we may not have found that balance yet. And it creates, it could create some tension in the document if we didn't write it correctly. I mean, I think last month I said that we don't think that this is a consistent document at this point, given that there isn't consistency yet here at this group, and there may not be. But I wanted to acknowledge that. I think you're spot on with your comments. Thank you.
Heidi?
Thank you. Yes, thank you to the subcommittee for all your work on the transportation element here. I just have a couple of questions. One is, do we want to spell out in the elements continuing things that we're already doing? And I just pose that as a rhetorical question, but I'm just wondering, like, under road safety, we have continue safe routes to school partnership with PAUSD and the Palo Alto Council of PTAs. Well, I assume that's not going anywhere. I'm just wondering why we call that out in the comp plan unless we're trying to make some change to it. I mean, this is a committee that's worked well together. So, and it's so critically important. I wouldn't want anyone to consider it something to get rid of or prioritize, or it's just part of the work that we do together. So I don't know if that's the sort of thing we're thinking about when we think about consolidating and just sort of focusing on the vision for change. Also, I'm wondering about putting stuff in that we don't have any control over. For example, encourage private schools within the community to develop walk and roll maps, which is great. And so I don't know, I mean, I know that's been a conversation with the Safe Routes to Schools group, but we don't really have any jurisdiction over that. So I'm not sure why it's in our comp plan, aside from work with everyone to develop walk and roll maps, businesses and otherwise. So yeah, I'm not sure why we call it out there. I'm just trying to think about ways to streamline the process, because there just are so many things in here. all the collaborations with the school district, of course, around road safety are critical, and I appreciate the thinking about programs for our teachers and staff in order to reduce auto vehicles. You know, we have teachers, as we have many other city workers who commute from far distances, and so it would be great to figure that out. And that's sort of a very big issue that I think a comp plan can talk about in terms of this is something we really want to put some effort into. The smaller things about continuing programs we're already doing, again, I'm just not sure about that. Thanks.
Thank you. Nanette? I'm sorry. Sylvia wanted to respond briefly from the city.
Hi, Heidi. Thanks for the comments. It is true, we have a Safe Routes to School program that I'm very happy to work for. However, when I went through the transportation element the first time, I noticed that our program isn't mentioned by name. There's actually nothing, I think, in the current version that we're using that doesn't mention it. So I wanted to make sure that we had a firm policy foundation for this program that actually, you know, that is such a huge part of the quality of life in this town. So that's why that was there, because I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that this program that encourages 4,000 students, you know, imagine 4,000 cars, if they, 4,000 students to bike in town. I just wanted to make sure that was going to remain, you know, in the document, because our current document doesn't mention it.
Absolutely, and I'm just wondering if we should just put it in the narrative as this is in the fabric of our life here or not, as opposed to calling out every individual program. I think it's essential, absolutely.
Thank you. Annette?
Okay, I'm a little bit drowning in paper, so I focused basically on the staff report and the matrix, which I never got a hard copy of. I agree the preface is much too long, and the maps are really hard to read, and I'm not sure that's going to be so useful, so I support reducing not only the preface, but also a lot of the programs and policies. So I have some general comments about the subcommittee. I just could not support anything that would touch the Baylands, so the ferry is absolutely out, and we need to figure out how to get people from Redwood City. I, with all due respect, don't support the comments on the airport. Most of the noise does come from San Francisco, and we might incorporate something about the work of Sky Posse. As far as the shuttle, Ellen probably has a good point about the seniors there, but I am very concerned about developing all these new routes that are going to be very expensive to run and maintain, much less the new buses, which makes sense. And I think before we do that, we should really survey some of the residents out there and see what they want. Perhaps they want these innovative new transportation services such as Uber and Lyft. Not sure that's really going to help the environment with the double trips. But I'd also like to see linkages, which is the PAMF volunteer program mentioned in the study, because I think that has a lot of growth. I'm not sure what coordinating with neighborhood planning efforts mean. I think we need to really talk a little bit more about that and see if that is just cosmetic or if that's something that how we would actually do that. Parking, that is really tough. I basically support most of what I hear about commuter parking, but I don't respect that in view of resident parking. I think we really need to consider residents a little bit more carefully. Not everyone, with all due respect again, is going to ride bicycles, especially the older you get or the dark and the cold. As far as any kind of overflow to neighborhoods, I think the RPP, although Jessica and group did a wonderful job, that is really a custom solution for downtown. And anytime we mention parking permits for neighborhoods, I think it's very, very important to mention College Terrace. As far as, I wanted to talk about overparking. I just can't support a lot of that, so I guess I'll get another round on that.
Thank you, Annette. Hamilton?
Thank you, Dan. We can best serve the City Council by reaching thoughtful consensus wherever possible, thus making passable, effective, and long-lasting zoning changes more likely. Thus, I want to build on some themes from the last meeting presented by my colleagues, such as adaptivity and exploration, while at the same time exploring addressing the current parking shortage that is of concern to so many. My comments are focused primarily around Goal 4, which is parking. Policy T 4.1, please add, do not allow new construction of underparked buildings where underparked is defined as having less parking space than would be needed for the occupants of the building. Program T 4.2.4, this would be a new one, allow businesses and apartment buildings to rent their parking spots, including to the city through RPP, thus being able to generate fees and income for any unused parking. In the meantime, we should allow, as an experiment, a one single bedroom style apartment building for carless seniors and affordable housing in downtown. But in order to mitigate the risk that this program doesn't work, we should provide it with 50% of parking, but only to be used for the RPP, not for any of the residents of that building. Use it as a case study, measuring the number of permits actually allowed and resident compliance. As a footnote, this program failed in Portland, but I still think it's worth trying here and getting some good data. And with the extra parking, I think it's fairly low risk. So it allows us to explore without significant consequences if it fails. Policy T 4.3, remove the sentence, and I feel pretty strongly about this, as do many other residents. The city should eliminate minimum parking requirements in transit-served areas. There was a consensus in the last meeting that this was not acceptable, and yet it's still in this version, so that raises concern. On a slightly different topic, program T 1.3.1, Stanford should offset new incremental office space by 120% of the impact on new car vehicle trips for SRP. Thank you.
Thanks, Shani.
Okay, so I agree with Bob about the airport comments, that there is too much detail about the building. I also think that the general public has spoken again and again about looking for the Baylands and nature to trump development in the airport, and I don't see that coming through. It's like, oh, staff will figure out how to minimize the impacts of the airport on the Baylands, and I don't see that as answering the concern that I had and others, and I definitely do not want to see more the airport grow and develop into a bigger one. So that's one thing. I also don't know why the ferry and BRT are still here, given that there was not a lot of support for a ferry on Embarcadero, and like the Sierra Club has written, BRT was essentially eliminated by the city council, and it's coming back. I think in Palo Alto, it showed that that would actually increase traffic into neighborhoods. One of the things that the introduction talks about a lot, but is not really coming through very much in the actual plan, is the level of service. There's a lot of discussion of that, but it's not really coming through. The only place, and maybe there's in other places that I didn't find it, is program T241, which maintain current thresholds for acceptable levels of service for intersections in Palo Alto and establish protocols for office, commercial, and multifamily residential development to evaluate level of service to transit vehicles, bicyclists, and pedestrians. I don't understand why vehicles, just private vehicles, are not in there. I don't understand why schools and hotels and all sorts of other things are not in there. And I also think that level of service really ties to health because of emissions. It really impacts all of us. And health is not really included here very much, but this is where it should be. And I think I've said that in one of the previous meetings. I would like to see CEQA requirements for the city that would actually have, or maybe there should be a program to develop a threshold of significance for level of service in Palo Alto. And that way we can implement that in any future projects that come through.
Thank you. Lydia.
So basically, Annette, Hamilton, and Shawnee have just said all my comments, so I'm going to just go with that.
Okay. Doria?
Turn it off. Okay, I would like to agree, to be brief, with Hamilton's comments, especially about Goal 4, and Annette's comments, and Shawnee's comments, especially about level of service, the airport, ferry, and CEQA threshold of significance. To go a little further, I think one of the problems with T4.3 is that given the way the RPP is being developed for downtown with unlimited day and week scratchers, there's no, and the very minimal reduction annually of which would amount to 2%, I think that the residential streets will be very impacted by purposely, at this point, underparking more buildings, in that the streets will be just as full because of the minimal annual reduction and the unlimited day and week passes. It just doesn't make sense given the current deficit. I also wanted to, airport is done, to, wait a second, I got confused. Unbundling, trying to find it, what page it's on. But basically, I think the unbundling of parking, residential, I think Elaine wanted to add maybe in her comments, and commercial. I think that this also could be a problem because where this is most likely to happen is next to the most impacted residential neighborhoods downtown in California Avenue, where the same thing will result if there's just this endless use of 2-hour parking, day passes, and week passes. Page 57, no, that's the airport, we don't need that anymore. I appreciate the appreciation and shout out that the element gives to Stanford's TDM success in the Stanford Research Park, but I think you should add something about how the College Terrace style RPPP really helped contribute to that success, and it would just be good to acknowledge that. That's that. Page 5. I was confused by the use of, I don't know if you, MASS versus our own kind of phrase, commuter wallet, and if we're using those interchangeably, I think it would be better to use the more general term that more people would understand. But maybe we're not using it interchangeably. That's sort of a question.
Thank you. Mark, you've already spoken, so I'm going to skip you, and then we'll go to Adrian.
Thank you. So just some quick comments. I agree in general the introduction is way, way too long. A couple people, myself included, have highlighted the need to at least discuss prioritization, and perhaps the introduction is a good place to do that in terms of prioritizing the goals, programs, and policies. Maybe we want to highlight specific goals such as a sustainable transportation network with things like EVs and TDM backing it up as the policies to get that done. I really appreciate what the subcommittee wrote about parking. I think it is helpful to evaluate all parking needs comprehensively, but I don't think that means we should build to meet all of those demands. If you build it, parkers will come. And I think that needs to be clearly stated because we can link our rationale there to essentially reducing SOV. So it's kind of disingenuous to say we want to evaluate all parking needs and build for all of them, but at the same time we want to reduce single occupancy vehicles. Those two are in opposition. And finally, I think the biennial parking study is a great idea. Just be sure to make it citywide. Thank you.
Thank you. Len? And then we'll go to Stephen, Lisa, excuse me, not Lisa, Stephen, Alex, and then Arthur, and then we'll open it up to the whole group.
Thank you.
I really like the way parking should be provided to meet demand. And there is a problem with parking in this town, and residents feel it. The people I talk to feel it all the time. And while we're saying that parking should be provided to meet demand, not future demand, but demand, then a number of the programs and policies, you know, kind of contradict what that overall principle is. For example, program T4.2.1, where we study the feasibility of reduced parking requirements for office, commercial, and multifamily residential. Policy T4.3, where the city should consider eliminating minimum parking requirements. Policy T4.6, continue to encourage shared parking in order to reduce the overall number of new parking spaces that must be provided on-site for new office, commercial, and residential development. My concern is that if we're not dealing with future growth and the current demand for parking, and we're hoping that fewer people drive, whether it's millennials or older people, then we may be creating we're creating more of a problem, because we're not guaranteed in a marketplace who is going to be purchasing those buildings, those occupancies, or what office, what kinds of businesses are going to be there. The school district is so good. A lot of the people coming in here have families and kids, and it's very difficult to go to soccer and Girl Scouts if you don't have a vehicle. I just want to be a little bit careful about how lax we're going to be about new buildings or discussing new buildings and projects in light of our demands on parking and the fact that parking should be provided to meet demand. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve, then Alex, and then Arthur. Everyone else has spoken, so.
Hamilton and I talked on the way over, and I want to appreciate his opening remark. I think at some point we and the council are going to have to discuss this issue that we really haven't about growth. We've gone all around it. And I appreciate adaptive and exploratory. We talked about trying a single room occupancy, micro unit place. We talked about maybe having residents being able to sell their permits. But I find the sequential nature of what we're doing, going element by element, very difficult. So in response to what Hillary said, I'd like us to be able to discuss the EIR alternatives, including the new one that they might make. But if we're going to discuss parking and development, shouldn't we do that after talking about business and the economy? And shouldn't both of those things be informed by the fiscal presentation that's going to go to the Finance Committee on March 1st? So I'd like them to come here too. I can't imagine that everyone around the table or on the council wants to make development decisions without any clue as to what it means for the city budget or the city economy going forward. But unless we find some way to integrate all this stuff and we just march through element by element and never come back, I just don't see how we do that. So I love what I think the subcommittee said here. I don't pretend that I understand it all. about parking, but I have no way to judge that without knowing whether we're shutting down the city. The last time I looked at the numbers, businesses provide 50 to 60% of the revenue. So I want to know how we're going to provide the services if we end up with some policies that restrict development, and then housing is a completely different thing. I'm very supportive of housing, whatever we do on job growth.
Thank you. Alex and then Arthur.
Fine. I wasn't at the last meeting, so I was just trying to catch up, read all the notes. I think the main thing I was just struck by is just the sheer quantity of policies and programs, and I guess I was curious if someone here or you all could speak to that, the nature, not that, you know, there's a set amount that we're gunning for, but is this actually doable? So from a bigger perspective, and what you're looking for from us. I actually tallied it up, and it was a lot, but I can't find them now. So they're somewhere buried in this ream of paper. Oh, there were like 100 programs and 128 policies, and it just seems kind of mind-boggling. I don't know if that's that just struck me. The other thing is, are we? Is this the point where the board chairs will, or the CAC chairs will vet the disagreements that exist? Is that what comes next? Okay. Because I think what I would like to know is what are the three main disagreements that the CAC has with regards to transportation, and could we dialogue about it with one another?
Thank you. Arthur.
So firstly, response to something that Heidi said, if we required all private schools in all zoning areas to have a conditional use permit, then we could require TDM and we could require walk and roll maps from these. And I've long advocated that they have that, and it seems a simple change to make. But that is a land use issue that affects transportation. The second thing is that self-park does not mean it satisfies code. Self-parked means that it satisfies demand for parking regardless of what that demand is, and the idea is to work that demand so it decreases over time. So I entirely agree with what Annette, Hamilton, Shani, Lydia, Doria, and Len have said, so I'm not going to repeat what they say. But I do want to say that the document is written in a biased manner, because the document assumes that we're going to have all the growth, and we're going to basically not park it, and we're going to exacerbate the parking issues in the RPP districts and the surrounding. That's the bias in the document, particularly since the notion of it being self-parked has been eliminated. The notion of the idea that that minimum parking requirements near transit have been eliminated. That's minimum parking requirements for a bus, for example, served by transit. It says in transit-served areas. Well, Midtown is served by transit by a bus that runs every half hour and by the shuttle that runs every half hour. That's not rich transit. And if you're going to eliminate minimum parking requirements in Midtown, that's crazy. So the issue is that it needs to be a little bit more finely than that, and needs to happen based on reduction in demand, not leading it the other way first. And the example in the document I gave of Portland shows that that's incorrect, and the assumption that millennials won't have cars is proved incorrect from the other document that I distributed in my thing. I just want to briefly talk about San Antonio and Charleston. I've distributed another document, which is, this document is from Mountain View study of North Bayshore, which talks about the transportation alternatives. They're considering closing that. These three documents are from the initial draft study of the widening 101, and basically says that there are more collisions at the Charleston on-ramp, off-ramp on 101 southbound than anywhere else north of 85 on 101. And the fact that we haven't fixed that is crazy. In addition, I took showing that there's traffic congestion over there. Amazingly, at 508, when I took it, there was an accident near there. But even if I didn't take it when there was an accident, it would still show congestion right at that interchange where there's no auxiliary merge lane. It's crazy.
We'll now open up to the floor. I see Bonnie. If others would like to speak, I will add you as I see you. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Okay, I'd like to hit the parking issue head on. Yeah, I don't know what it is. Is that better? Can you hear me? Can I that's good. Okay. So a couple of things. I understand that many of us are not going to give up driving right away. But the goal in this comp plan, the overarching goal is to reduce greenhouse emissions, reduce reliance on SOV. And one of the ways of getting there is to provide more transit and other options for people to use. If that happens, hopefully the demand in certain areas of our city, the demand for parking will decrease. And we won't need as much parking. That's why I think what the staff report about what the subcommittee said is to talk about managing parking demand is probably more flexible language looking towards the future. I know it's not going to happen tomorrow, but maybe in 10 years, we will have less demand for parking downtown. And so we want to have the language in this 15-year looking comp plan to be not so restricted, to be not so knee-jerk responsive to an existing problem in downtown, University Avenue, affecting one area. I mean, it doesn't affect me in the Palo Verde neighborhood. They're, it's a one issue. But if we keep on saying self-park, now what self-park means to Arthur doesn't mean the same to me. So that's why I think I would like to not use those terms, but just say the parking should meet whatever the demand is, and the demand is determined by regular studies and about the demographics of the occupants of the particular building. And that's what determines the demand. And the minimum parking requirements in the zoning code need to be looked at like on a regular basis so that they can be refined to meet the demand of where this particular new development is.
You want to finish your thought there?
What? Yeah, so that's why I'm saying that those of you who are really concerned about the environment should try and be more flexible in the language, not be so adamant about saying all new buildings have to be self-park, because that to me says you're going to have to put lots and lots of parking spaces because we haven't changed the zoning code yet. But on the other hand, if you say, let's have policies where we're constantly looking at what the demand is, and that's what determines what the minimum parking requirements are, that's where we can go. The adaptive view. I don't disagree that we shouldn't solve the parking problem, but I'm saying this is 15 years in the future. I mean, in 5 years, we may have a recession and there'll be tons of parking spaces downtown. We need to have, adaptive language is what I'm urging. And I think we can come to agreement on that.
Thank you, Bonnie. Annette, and then Elaine, and then Hamilton.
Well, I think parking is definitely one of the areas that we are in a little bit of a minority-majority position. So I do believe that parking should meet the demand, but I think that, boy, if you look out there in the next 10 years, maybe 15, we're not there yet, especially with all the new projects. So let me just read what I said in one of my writings. Every commercial project, I feel, should be fully parked, unless in the future there is a demonstrated significant reduction in use of cars. And I don't think that's going to happen in the next 10 or 15 years with all the development in downtown. Cal Ave and Midtown is just ripe for development. Potentially, we could analyze it and look at the zoning code and make changes. Whitney mentioned that the plan is sort of schizophrenic and that we don't really, we say one thing in one place and one thing in another. Jennifer also wrote something that I thought was very good. I strongly oppose the comp plan policy that calls for eliminating minimum parking requirement in transit-served areas. And what I like is this is a policy that calls for baby steps informed by area-specific data about successful reduction in parking demand. So I'd like to see this as a majority-minority position. One other thing is just, we talk about these disabled or whatever people, I would like to see the language special needs. I mean, there's some very awkward phrasing in here, especially the wording, those lacking resources, which sounds very strange to me. So let's consider maybe the special needs population or the vulnerable population. So that's probably
Thank you. Hamilton, then Bob, and then Arthur.
I think one of the questions.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I apologize. Elaine, then you, Hamilton.
Sure,
I'm
no
sorry.
problem.
I'm trying to find a reference, and I apologize. I wasn't paying attention there.
Thanks, Dan. So, yes, parking. I think Hamilton's point about self-parking is right, but I think we have to, sorry. We have to be, can you hear me? Wait, can you hear me now?
Stay away.
Oh, all right.
Yes.
But it doesn't sound like I'm on, can you hear me? Oh, sorry. Sorry. No, self-parking is right, but there, a little bit? Okay, self-parking is, well, see, it's hard for me to hear,
I'll give you feedback.
I can't hear the feedback. Is that good? All right. All right, Jason's gonna be my guide. So self-parking is correct, but I think that we need to also use and think about the right tools for parking. I think we need to separate ourselves from, we need the right tools to get the right outcomes. And so I think what I was trying to explain earlier is a lot of the parking problems that we see downtown, for example, are generated by buildings that have no opportunity and no way to actually self-park themselves. And at the same time, we're doing what Whitney pointed out, which is by creating these minimum parking requirements and like creating free parking basically for new developments, we're actually inducing demand. So I think the challenge is how do we align the sustainable transportation goals that I think a lot of us are interested in moving forward, and Council has directed us to work towards, and align the parking programs and policies so that they work together. And I think Hamilton's comments are kind of getting us there. I think but we need to think about what the 21st century tools are for that, to manage parking in a 21st century way and not actually creating more demand more parking demand than we actually need in future. Donald Shoup said that parking minimums are to parking policy what bloodletting was to medicine in the 19th century. And so I think we really need to be careful about the tools that we use to manage the parking and manage the demand, and not simply just say, okay, and we have to recognize too where the parking requirements came from. They are set from a sort of 1950s, 1960s style, and I understand that they're still relevant. I'm not saying that we need to abolish them. I think we should consider right-sizing them so that they are in step and in sync with our sustainable transportation goals, and align those two major goals so that we're getting towards a Palo Alto that only needs as much parking as it needs, and not more than, not so that we're not creating more than we actually need, and not also simultaneously incurring a lot of traffic and a lot of excess greenhouse gas and emissions. On the point of unbundling, I think, oh, well, okay, never mind.
Yes, and it's Hamilton, then Bob, Arthur, Heidi, Doria, and then Stephen.
So continuing to talk about parking, and this is partly talking about where we think there might be some controversy. So I'm going to follow up on some of my previous colleagues' comments. If you want to call it manage parking demand, absolutely. The goal is to have the right amount of, the goal is not to create more new, let's say, office employees or residents than cars that are created. So we definitely want to manage the parking demand, and we definitely want it to be adaptive. I think that, Lane, one of the reasons I didn't mention some of these tools is because I already feel like we're successfully moving down the path with them. For example, pricing. We're now doing pricing. Hopefully it'll go up, right? Because I think $500 is kind of cheap for a one-year permit. But so I do feel like we are already starting down the path of pricing, and we do want to do all these other programs. I think the programs need to be accountable for the results. And so I think what concerns, if we look at areas of compromise, the big concern from a lot of residents is that we're trying to, we have this problem, where, for example, in downtown, we're 2,000 spaces short. So it's not like we have excess parking right now. We have a significant shortage. You can't get parking in City Hall at noon. All the spaces are filled unless you have a permit. So what people want to see is that we have some mechanism in place that while we're managing demand and essentially suppressing it through parking fees and providing lots of good alternatives, we're also not making the problem worse before we make it better. So, and I think that if we can get to that point where we acknowledge there's a program and we need to make it better, it's not mutually exclusive with any of these other things. And we have there's a nice program in here to do a biennial measurement. And so that's a great tool for us to constantly reevaluate. You know, at some point we are going to hit a recession, and it'll be a different landscape. So I think the City Council would greatly appreciate it if we can also remain flexible and adaptive.
Okay. Thank you. Hamilton, Bob, Arthur, Heidi.
My comments are pretty quick. I wanted to turn towards the sustainability elements in the transportation plan. And I understand that the Sustainability Climate Action Plan has new policies and programs that are being suggested. And so one of the things logistically I'm trying to figure out is when the SCAP comes forward into the process, how do we as a team all of a sudden see new input that's sort of coming in where perhaps new policies and programs are suggested. So I look forward for some feedback at some point from staff around that. I think that there's some really great ideas that are going to be in the SCAP, but it's going to be, it's something that I think we need to kind of factor in. I'd also enjoyed, and I felt that council enjoyed Stephen Heck's commentary at the sustainability regarding transportation, and again wondered whether there were elements of his remarks that would inform our transportation element. In particular, one area that got me really excited was his view of transportation where it's generated within Palo Alto, and the use of bikes and e-bikes. And occasionally I hear this remark with great respect that why are we talking about bikes when it won't necessarily work for seniors, but there's a lot of people who still can use that as a transportation mode, and I feel that we tend to discount it as a solution that could reduce inter-trip demand that goes to downtown and almost could begin identifying special parking for bicycles and his notion of e-bikes. So I rode my bike from North Palo Alto to this meeting, and it's a pain to ride 30 minutes. By the time you get here, you're worn out. So finally, I wanted to thank Penny for the thorough and comprehensive remarks regarding the school bike program, and wanted to support them. If a statement of support helps, I wanted to make sure that they got locked into the minutes. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. Just before Arthur, Jessica from the city staff, you had a couple of comments.
Can you guys hear me okay? Not too close like Elaine. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say this is a really great and engaging discussion. I did want to kind of just maybe add some color from the perspective of the city staff who are responsible for, implementing the programs that come as a result of council direction when considering this plan. And around the parking, I'll call it the controversy, clearly we have some very polarized points of view in this room. And I just want to kind of add a little color from a planning perspective on that. Parking is the single biggest tool we have when it comes to regulating traffic and congestion, the single biggest. We talk about Stanford a lot. I heard the Stanford Research Park TDM and the success of Stanford University's TDM program mentioned. That program is successful because Stanford actively subsidizes lots of transit programs and they actively regulate and very highly price parking. In the conversation we have tonight and what I see echoed in the plan, we have a lot of comments about subsidizing transit. Sylvia mentioned, codifying the Safe Routes to School program, making sure we have these things in the plan so that we can create programs that promote active transportation. We have things about, regulating, managing parking. On the flip side, we also have things about parking to meet demand. And I just want to sort of explain that if we believe that the future of Palo Alto should be about the single occupant vehicle and remain about vehicular transportation, we will not be successful in implementing these programs that we're all talking about. We want people to ride the shuttle, we want people to ride bikes. If we continue to put parking minimums on everything, if we continue to keep adding parking creates traffic. If we believe that the future of Palo Alto is more about alternative transportation and sustainable modes of transportation, having things like parking minimums will slow that down considerably. I'm not saying either one is the right one, but I am saying that having a plan which has both in sort of equal measure and sort of gives staff, well, look, we could do this, or how about we could do this? We could not park this, or we could park this. We want to hear from all of you, and all of your points are valid, but that sort of, yes, we want everything, and we want to eat our cake too, that is challenging for us.
Welcome to Palo Alto. Arthur? Thank you, Jessica.
So the comment about having our cake and eating it too makes sense to me. And what I'd like to suggest is that we implement the College Terrace style RPP program citywide, and then if you want not parking for the businesses, go ahead and figure out how they're going to get there and where they're going to park, because they won't park in the neighborhoods. And that's a trade-off you have to make. And so if you're going to do a trade-off that says, no, we're going to continue to park in the downtown neighborhoods and around California Avenue and such for a period of time, then you have to provide parking for the new businesses that come in. That's a trade-off that you have to make. So I think that the issue is the conflict between the PTC policy T4.6, which hasn't made it into this draft, even though I count at least 8 people on the CAC who have explicitly said that they want it there. That's clearly a controversy. And and I'm not sure if it's a minority opinion or majority opinion, but certainly has enough support to be in there. The issue, that's the policy that says all new development should be completely self-parked, or at least parking to meet demand. And the issue is that the narrative should explain the transition. That's a good purpose in a narrative, to explain the transition that now they have to be self-parked for the current demand. And our objective is to drive the demand lower so that future projects will have less parking because the demand will be demonstrated to be lower, as was mentioned by Hamilton, I believe. So that's the issue that needs to happen. Now, if you have a project that has excess parking now, that is built to current standards for which it is determined that it has excess parking, Hamilton suggested, and I agree with the idea of rent that parking out to the city or rent that parking out to other buildings that are underparked and because they were built without parking. But you have to create a transition. You can't assume the conclusion and say, okay, suddenly cars won't appear. They won't. They will. They'll appear and they'll be in the neighborhoods. And that's where, and if you want to eliminate parking in neighborhoods tomorrow, then you can think about the idea, phase 2 immediately, no business parking. Will people be willing to do that? Because if you're saying tomorrow buildings be built without near transit have no parking, that's the same kind of argument. They're saying, oh, we need a transition. Well, you need a transition for parking as well. And one last comment I'd like to make on this, and that is, there seems to be a new idiom that's been sprinkled through like peppers thrown into the document, and that is this insertion of office, commercial, and multifamily residential. And I'm sort of wondering, why was that inserted? What does it leave out? What's excluded by it? What's the point? I don't understand why that was thrown in there, and it seems to be excluding, I'm not sure, mixed use, hotels, I'm not sure what it's excluding, but if you want to exclude single-family residential or low density like RMD and R2, then say so. Don't do it by selecting a few things that you have selected to be in, and who knows what's taken out. Thank you.
Okay. Heidi, then Doria, then Stephen. Or Steve, excuse me.
Exciting conversation. Thank you, Jessica, for that overview. That was good to, it's always good to know what the people are going, what staff is going to do with the guidance in the plan in terms of thinking about this issue. Compelling points. I think it's, to Jessica's point, we are going to have different ideas contained within this plan, and then it will be up to the electeds to figure out sort of how to implement that, and it's good to have short-term and long-term ideas and possibilities. We don't have to solve every problem here right now, although it's nice to know where we're going. I wanted to clarify something I said earlier about the Safe Routes to Schools, which is such a valuable program. I think what I meant by not putting just continue the Safe Routes to School partnership is this is a visioning document, so what do we want to do within that partnership? We want to, we have another program that says establish a comprehensive, proactive traffic safety program. Do we want to expand Safe Routes to Schools, pre-K-12, expand from K-5 on? I mean, it's sort of, if we're going to put in something about one of the partnerships that already exists, what vision do we want to attain with that? So that was just my clarification. Also on bicycle parking, we have a policy T414 to improve and add attractive, secure bicycle parking at public and private facilities, including multimodal transit stations, city parks, city streets, and other public rights-of-way, private developments, and other community destinations. I think around schools should be listed there, so I would add schools to that one. Thank you.
Thank you. Doria, then Steve, then Adrian.
So I agree with everything that Arthur said, and I think if you want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and get people out of single occupancy vehicle, gasoline-driven cars, you should agree that the best way to do that is to not fill up neighborhoods, which were never intended for non-residential uses, the streets, with commuter parking. You're not helping the TDM measures at all. The Transportation Management Agency should be outraged that the reduction annually is only 2%, because that's not helping them. We want much better than that. So if you really want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, you'll vote for Arthur's idea of citywide, which I've discussed here before. I'd also like to add that on page 19 in the narrative, neighborhood impacts, it says it describes chronic problems on neighborhood streets, speeding, commuter shortcut, and too much traffic, and doesn't even mention the parking, which may not yet be in every single neighborhood, but I think most of us here would agree that this comp plan is for everybody. It's for everybody right now and everybody up till 2030. So it's not just for neighborhoods that haven't been affected yet by a problem. I agree that pricing is an absolutely important tool for traffic demand management. The real sad thing, though, is that the paid parking that we have in this city is very, very cheap, especially for business people who in other cities would expect to pay way, 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 way more. So we're still giving it away. you know, the problem with saying, relying on the fact that the buildings in downtown especially are old, from the 20s or 30s, does not reflect the fact that the buildings have tripled and doubled in size, in many cases through sometimes legal means, like TDRs, and sometimes through, I think, negligent planning errors, and so TDRs, in lieu parking fees, that never created one single parking spot when they took the money. The parking lots downtown were paid originally by the assessment, so the buildings are much bigger. There's way more people there, and there's also the fact that lots of retail, ground floor retail, has been transitioned to office, and it's very dense office. So it's not fair to say the buildings are old and they were never parked. Thanks.
Thank you, Doria. Steve, Adrian, then Mark.
Okay. I get that parking in new development is controversial. I'm a numbers person, and I'd kind of like to second what Jessica said. If you're a numbers person, you know that reducing the demand for parking, reducing the number of people who have to drive or drive alone, you want to be going after the whole pool, not just the small amount of people who are in new buildings. The most reductions will come from changing the behavior of the people who are already here. Now, I've heard in Hamilton's idea of consensus a couple of ideas, one from Arthur, of allowing existing places with extra parking to rent them out. I think some residents who might get extra permits might be induced to sell them and take the money and maybe park in their garages. I'll never bike in my life. I don't see well enough, but I think a bicycle program can allow some existing residents to reduce their demand for driving, as might be a good shuttle program. But the main point is, if we're really serious about reducing car use and the associated demand with parking, we ought to spend a little less time talking about parking related to new developments and a lot more time talking about the stuff that Jessica and the TMA is talking about that affect the behavior of all of the residents and all of the employees.
Thank you, Steve. Adrian, Mark, and then myself.
Thank you. So I thought this was a bit of a controversy, but it seems in some ways we're coming together a little bit, which is encouraging. I tentatively agree with Arthur about the RPP program. It is a hard trade-off, and it's one that Palo Alto's going to have to choose. I think that's probably a decision for council to make and implement. Just to reemphasize, providing and building free parking is like giving out chocolates, except for cars. You build them and they will be used, as Jessica mentioned, and the vast majority of parking in the city is completely free. It's also a trade-off. In Palo Alto, you often hear people saying we don't have enough space for that next new building or for a new development. So I want to ask everybody, do we have enough space for parking? Is that really the trade-off we want to make, building parking lots instead of homes or businesses or parks, real parks? I also just want to agree with Bonnie, what she said about using adaptive language in this comprehensive plan. It shouldn't, the language of this comp plan shouldn't be based on what we are thinking here and today, but I think we can do a better job of defining adaptability, whether it's a time-bound measure based on demand, as a number of folks have mentioned, maybe it's on technology, or maybe it's on the economics of our region. So we might want to look into that a little bit in terms of the narrative, emphasizing how we might evaluate what is flexible in terms of parking or other transportation measures.
Thank you, Adrian. Mark, then myself, and then Don.
So, for parking, if we don't provide an alternative for people to use, there's no other way for them to get from point A to point B. Jessica mentioned that the program, the TDM at Stanford was very successful. Well, they provided buses, they provided passes, and they provided buses that go from Palo Alto or their campus to the East Bay. So that's why it was successful. But just saying we're not going to provide parking and expect people to show up, that's an unreasonable thing to say. Buses that show up every half hour or every hour are not considered public transportation. They are useless. To go from San Jose, from somewhere in San Jose to Palo Alto, if you drive and it takes you 20 minutes and an hour and a half by bus, that is not acceptable. So these are the things that we need to think about. Actually, it takes much shorter time to provide a bus system than build a parking lot. So that's something that we should look into a lot, sooner than thinking about parking lots. Another thing for parking is to unbundle parking from high-density developments, and then have the parking for purchase separately from the unit. So that so people probably the ones who don't need to buy cars, they don't need to have a parking. So again, it is a delicate balance, but it's something that we need to look into. As for congestion, I looked at policy 1.25 about a fuel-efficient taxi service. I don't think that will reduce traffic congestion. It is more, it will reduce the greenhouse gases. So I think that's something that needs to be fixed in the policy. And then again, also for congestion for the school district, if the Palo Alto Unified School District would consider returning the busing for students, that will eliminate hundreds of car trips for people taking their kids to school. That should, the other thing is we should also provide car lifts to reduce the area needed for parking.
Thank you, Mark. Myself, then Jason, then Lydia, then Amy, then Shani, and I think we'll have heard from everyone at that point. I'm sorry, Don, and then Jason, Lydia, Amy, Shani.
Yes.
Really liking the comments this evening. A couple of very quick things. First of all, in comp plans in the past, it was very easy to make broader statements. Today we cannot. Solutions are almost have to be done block by block. Parking solutions that are appropriate for California Avenue are not appropriate for University Avenue. Parking solutions that are appropriate for University Avenue at the Caltrain station are inappropriate for Copper Street. So our language, our solutions, the vision for it has to become far more specific, far less general in order to be able to make these things work. I agree with a lot of the comments. I think the suggestion about the observation by Jessica in terms of dealing with the entire city as opposed to the individual is spot on. This is a great opportunity for us to be bold as a committee and make recommendations to the council for how to deal with that. A couple of quick things. Social justice topic. I was talking with Jeremy a moment ago and the findings of trying to get the staff, many of whom don't have the economic wherewithal to afford a $500 parking permit, and then their employer saying, well, that's not our problem, you got to figure that out. How do we drive that in the city? How do we get them to perform? How do we address those sorts of issues? I want to talk very briefly. Policy 4.2.2, consider changes to the zoning ordinance to count partially or fully enclosed private garages dedicated to individual housing units as floor area in mixed use and multifamily residential developments. Hadn't really focused on that one before, but if I'm understanding it, that would essentially half to a third the size, the amount of housing units that we can have in the city, because they would be filled up with parking. So that really, I think, as a policy or something to consider, really needs to be rethought, unless we're also going to be coupling that with enlargements of FAR to allow the amount of housing that would otherwise be able to go in there. That's a big topic for me. Also, policy 2.2, design and maintain the city's street network to provide a variety of alternate routes so that traffic loads on any one street are minimized. I don't actually think that's our policy. We want to keep big loads, big traffic onto arteries. We want those larger loads to not go through neighborhoods. I think that policy 2.3 and 2.8, all deal with those topics and can be rolled up into one. And we can find a way to better express what we believe the policy should be in our city. Don, then Jason, Lydia, Amy, and then Shannon.
Thank you. Dan, I want to agree with what you just said, that the parking was a block by block and it doesn't apply. The same strategies will not apply everywhere. I want to slightly disagree with the fact that looking at the city as a whole, I agree that it's a city as a whole problem, but I was informed by reading this, and that the cohorts of young versus old, of employees versus citizens and whatever, did really answer all these questions quite differently. And in the end, 50% of the people said they would use some other transportation rather than single user vehicle if they had. So I think just like block by block parking, we need to look at cohort by cohort strategy. If you could reduce this, one of these things. I want to agree with Jessica, who just disappeared. What I was trying to say with this diagram is that if you consider all of the parking policies, they have different effects on what congestion is or what the environment is, and I think that those relationships are really important. In terms of the parking and the fact that, like Adrian just said, people don't take shuttle because why would you if they only come every half an hour or whatever. I think that policy 123 that talks about the shuttle needs to explore the availability of an on-demand service and the possibility of that in the future, and also talk about the reliability and confidence that a shuttle will come when you need it and expect it, and we need to market that. With due respect to Alan, relative to 1.23.2, where we were talking about we need to study including schools and seniors, I would argue that the shuttle service, if it also serves business, if I knew I could get from somewhere in Palo Alto to my lunch downtown because there was a shuttle available that was on a 10-minute service or something, I might take that shuttle instead of driving and parking downtown. So I think any study needs to include because if we could put all the seniors into shuttles that aren't currently in shuttles, I'm not sure we would change the we would make it better for seniors, and I totally support that. I'm not sure we would change congestion very much. We can change congestion by getting business users and others into shuttles. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Jason, Lydia, Amy, Shannon.
So, I guess there's two things. One, a general concern about the process. I feel like, to a certain extent, we boxed ourselves in the way we've dealt with this review, and I would like to at least think that when you go for other sections, we try and do it better, in that we have one issue that is the most contentious issue that actually there are probably paths to resolving, despite what it may seem, by actually saying, like, what are the problems? Let's focus on the problems. How do we address those problems rather than going through 50 sub-points and what are we going to do at this intersection? Actually say, what are we concerned about? Traffic, congestion, parking. Why, what are our goals? And walk through them. And if we had spent some time on that, and I'd like us in some of these other sections, if they're particularly contentious things, to talk through it. Because if we walk through, what are the issues that we're concerned about? Like I said, every one of the parking spots, if we tomorrow opened up 2,000 parking spots downtown, what happens? Traffic gets worse. Like, we know that. Like, there's 2,000 more people can now drive in every single day. Every one of those spots is going to be going in and out. Unless we somehow convince everybody to come in and out off cycle, we will have challenges. And I think we want to address these things in a holistic way rather than just saying every building will have parking and then somehow we'll reduce traffic. If we can go through the concerns, I think we can help, because a lot of those things also, like I'm an avid biker. Well, I used to be an avid biker. I have 3 kids, and I ride my kids around in a cargo bike all the time. You may have seen us cruising around the farmers market or up and down downtown, and we do all of our shopping that way. The city does not make that easy. I would never ride to this library. I would never ride to many of the places outside of downtown. But down in a few areas downtown, we've made it easy enough where my 70-something-year-old father, who just moved from rural Maryland, where he hadn't ridden a bike in 20 years, now at least bikes 10 blocks to our house every day. And that's because in that area, it's okay to bike. If we spent more time and effort actually making cross routes for the places people want to go, like have actual bike routes. I live just off Addison. I'm frightened to have my son ride on Addison up to his school because the first 2 blocks have no bike lanes. So I wish we could try and spend a little bit more time on focusing on the big problems and then coming up with some, I think, more holistic solutions rather than just the fine points.
Thank you, Jason. Lydia, Amy, Shani, and then everyone will have spoken. I've asked Jeremy to see if he would reiterate for us what he's heard and be able to distill some of the topics, and then we can take our remaining time and focus in on those.
So first, I want to say that I do agree with Arthur wholeheartedly, along with Doria on this, in their comments about parking. I still think that this city, I don't agree with Adrian's comment about if you build it, they'll come, because at this point, today, we're at a deficit. Parking is at a deficit, so we're playing catch up right now. And no matter how much we catch up, growth is going to happen. Even in the comp plan itself, it says that we've done everything that we can do for streets and to mitigate it, but traffic has only increased. If growth continues and building continues, parking is going to be needed and traffic is going to increase. And to plan for that is what we need to do. I do agree with Jason that we do need to make more effort, but make more effort not on one particular mode of transportation, on all modes. Public transportation, at this point, we're really leaving behind with all these adaptive apps and all this technology. We're leaving behind a big segment of our community, and it's continued to grow. It's the seniors. It's not convenient for them. They can't get to it. They don't know if they can get to the next one. How long is it going to take? In this comp plan, it mentions all the outreach programs and the paratransits and whatever. If you read a comment on the digital commenter, one of them says that it can take quite a while, 3 hours for them to get to wherever it is that they're going to get to. And by that time, when they return, they're exhausted. So it needs to have an easier method and more convenient. As for, let me see. In terms of goals to reduce SOV and GHG emissions, I think, again, it goes back to public transportation, providing more of that. And that's one way of trying to find a way to decrease it. We've been going through this for the last 10 years. I see this growth over here and all this congestion since 2003. It hasn't let up. And if we think that by 2035 it's going to let up, and by reducing things, I think that's a big step back. As for parking, even though people get out of their gas cars, they're going to go get their electric cars, and they still need parking. So that's my comments.
Thank you. Amy, Shani? Sorry, Amy's first and then Shani. I apologize.
Too close. I think that there's a lot of good ideas floating around, and I'm just going to throw something in. Transportation is tightly related to housing. So we hear that you build it, they'll come. I see that a lot of the demands coming from my clients and the people that in my industry I hear about, that the older people, the younger people, the working youngs, and they all like to stay close to where they work, where they can walk to. So downtown is a wonderful location, Cal Ave and the university. So how do we build it such that they will come? We will build it such that is suitable for seniors and the young. They do not need a big 3-bedroom, 4 bedrooms. They do not need a 2-car garage parking. So that's how we will, take these two elements and combine them and make it work. And the other thing that we talk about parking, parking is that part of the traffic congestion that a lot of frustrations also comes from, wasting time in the, in traffic, and also it produces a lot of pollution. I wonder if that we can study about this is synchronized traffic lights, because from what I think that is happening right now is that all the traffic lights that are out of sync, and it's some sort of a pre-programmed, and I don't know when they were last updated and programmed, so if we can synchronize the light so that we can go back to this old level of a service to see how fast that we can go through. And I think that is a part of the transportation that I would like to see happen. Thanks.
Thank you. Amy Shani?
So I agree with all of Arthur's comments and with the comment about policy 2.2, that the city network should not be equal and some streets should have more traffic than others. I think that a parking program that citywide will be needed. Our neighborhood where Arthur and I live right now, there is no impact, but I expect that when the bridge over 101, Adobe Creek Bridge, will be constructed, there will be a traffic issue or parking issue in our neighborhood, because people will want to park and take their bikes over the creek to get to North Bayshore. North Bayshore is expecting to build 10,000 housing units. They're not talking about parking those housing units. Somehow they assume that the people living there will not want to travel by car. What does that mean for us? So I think that we need to start thinking ahead about what is coming given development around us. The other thing that is happening, and we see it already, but it's kind of out of sight, so we don't think about it too much. There is a lot of parking happening at the airport. I guess that's the car sellers that are parking their fleets at the airport. So we're already using very precious land for parking where it shouldn't be. The buses that are part of TDMs and other programs do need parking. They were used to park in Mountain View in certain neighborhoods. People got really upset because many of them idle as they park. They started pushing them away. Now a lot of them are parking in parks, actual city parks, and they're parking at Moffett, and they're parking at other places that are out of sight. If we get more of those programs, we have to think about those modes. And yes, a van bus saves 40 single vehicle trips, but it still needs parking, and it's a big vehicle. So thinking about that and what's coming, I don't see enough of it in our plan. I see a lot of things that are addressing a lot of their current programs, but this is going 15 years forward. In these 15 years, a lot more development will happen, not only in Palo Alto, but all around us, and especially in this part of town. What's going to happen in North Bayshore is definitely going to impact us. And along El Camino, San Antonio. One thing about the demand is that if we base, I'm going to just say one sentence. If we base our solutions on demand, we are assuming the demand will go down, but it could go up and a lot. And so it's better to have something that deals with things in general and not depending on demand, because we could lose that game really fast and having a lot more parking needed. And I really don't want to see parking in residential neighborhoods. Thank you.
Jeremy, can you crystallize some of the things that you've heard? And after you do that, we can do one more short round. Bonnie, you had spoken at the very beginning, so everybody's spoken once. So I've got you on the second round after Jeremy speaks. if I could ask you to wait until after Jeremy? Thank you. I do.
You've made this very challenging for me this evening to try to find some consensus, but I do think there's some consensus, and I'm purposefully staying a little higher level too, but there were a couple areas that just looking around and hearing from the comments, I think people generally are agreeing on. Number one, that the entire city benefits from some sort of suite of solutions. There isn't going to be one solution in one particular part of the city that's going to make it better for everyone. So I heard consensus around looking at the entire city. I heard consensus around the protection of our neighborhoods as much as possible. I think that everyone agrees on that point. I did hear consensus related to the use of demonstration projects, whether the ilk of Hamilton, that Hamilton was suggesting, or other versions of that. There seemed to be some consensus and understanding what is possible here. There seemed to be a lot of consensus around one of the comments that Bonnie made, that parking should meet demand, but we should study what the demand should be. People seem to be agreeing with that kind of concept. I would have a moment ago said I thought I heard some consensus around looking at some demand management policies. I'm not sure we're quite there, but there were a lot of people seemed in agreement that demand management, whatever that looks like, I'm not going to define that for you, is a possibility. I would also say that even though there isn't complete agreement that RPP is the perfect program, there's a lot of consensus that RPP-like things have helped and could help in other places. I saw some agreements around Arthur's comments and the like. So those are the areas that I heard that I thought people were starting to come together at. Not perfect, but I think we were getting there. And I'm happy if there was any additional ones that I missed to include those.
Thank you. I've currently got 4 people on the list: Arthur, Annette, Bob, and Bonnie. If there are others. Shinny, did you want to go as well?
You don't have to.
You don't have to. Why don't you go ahead, and then Arthur will go.
Turn this on. Okay, so Arthur mentioned a couple of things which I don't agree with, so there isn't consensus on having an RPP program all throughout the city is a little crazy. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in Mountain View that's going to affect South Palo Alto, but South Palo Alto are mostly, it's all R1. Everybody is required to have a 2-car garage. Whether they use it or not for their cars is their problem. The streets, I walk all over that area. There's no parking problem. There aren't any cars parked on the streets. I mean, there's a few, of course, but it isn't an issue. Plus, you have these many churches, especially along Middlefield, that have huge, wide, empty parking lots. So a citywide RPP program, until we have a problem there, it would be absurd to put in the comp plan now. The other thing I want to say is health. People have mentioned that this element should mention health. And here's a healthy tip. If you want to have lunch downtown, you can park south of Embarcadero and have a nice 10-minute walk to a restaurant downtown, and you've got your lunch and your health, and you're not impacting the neighborhoods that are immediately towards downtown. And the other most important thing I want to say, the numbers that I saw about the traffic, the data, show most of the traffic is coming from outside Palo Alto. That even if we have a shuttle, that will be a wonderfully convenient thing for those of us who drive internally in Palo Alto, I don't think that's going to make a bit of difference to the parking problems in downtown and Cal Ave. So our regional influence is critical. If people who live in San Jose find that it's too expensive to park in downtown Palo Alto, hopefully they will go to their jurisdictions and say, make transit better for me so I can get to Palo Alto. So this is the big picture, is that the emphasis on making sure our region has better transit will really, really help. Thank you for letting me speak again, Dan.
Thank you, Bonnie. Arthur?
I actually agree with what Bonnie just said. I wasn't suggesting that we have RPP along all of Palo Alto, But that's what we would have to have if we didn't require new parking for new developments. That's a trade-off you need. I don't think we should have no parking for new developments, and therefore we don't actually need RPP everywhere. So we need it really where we need it, which is in more places, and we need to get to College Terrace as soon as possible. So firstly, searching for parking causes congestion unless you have parking apps, and if you don't have parking, you're gonna have people circling around for the parking that doesn't exist. Secondly, if people don't use parking, don't give them permits, but those permits are in the day, they can still park at night, causing congestion on streets at night, so that's still a problem. And new parking garages that were proposed under the TOT tax could sell cheaper permits for low-income seniors and retail workers. So that's a solution to that. This is a sequence to the issue. First of all, we have to realize that the reason that Stanford University was so successful is because the county had a general use permit that says, if you increase your driving, we stop your development. That's a severe limit. There was no new net trips imposed. So we need something similar to that to really get this to work. So firstly, what we need to do is, the first problem is when you're in a hole, stop digging. So at least new development shouldn't make it any worse. So new development should park based on demand. Secondly, we should rapidly reduce the amount of parking in the neighborhoods to zero for businesses. The amount of business parking in the neighborhoods should be reduced to zero. That will drive businesses to provide transit. They could provide transit the way Stanford has, but we need to do that collectively because it's kind of hard to do that business by business. Downtown, maybe a little easier in the Stanford Research Park, but we need to work collectively. The DMA should work on that. Maybe instead of Google-type buses, we pay VTA and Samtrans to run the equivalent so that anybody can get to Palo Alto, by paying their $5 and get to downtown Palo Alto from wherever these buses go. That wouldn't be too bad. Then what you do is that availability of transit, which is driven by business, because their employees need to park, okay? That means that that reduces parking requirements because transit is being provided. Because you're providing more transit, then and only then can you reduce residential parking. You can't reduce residential parking until there's actually less demand for that parking. So that's actually the last step. We need to put leverage, as was mentioned, on the people commuting to Palo Alto because that's where the leverage is. One final thing about this, Dan mentioned program T 4.2.2, which talks about the idea of townhouses with garages that are sort of glued to the townhouse and are fully enclosed, where people don't park in their garages, they put stuff in them. Now that's okay in an R1 neighborhood where you got an apron you can park in, the setback. But in RM30, RM15, whatever, there's no driveway, there's no space in the front of your house to park in. So you can't do that. And so the issue about discouraging that kind of parking is by counting it towards FAR. It doesn't count, I'm not proposing counting it towards FAR if you build podium parking with all these open spaces that nobody's going to store stuff in, they're going to park cars. So that was the idea of discouraging that kind of parking, because we can't increase the parking requirements based on the state housing density law, but we can basically we can penalize parking that people won't use for their cars. Witness the parking development Arbor Real, where there's a lot of overflow parking into the surrounding neighborhood because people are not parking in their garages. They're parking on the street on Wilkie Way and in that surrounding neighborhood, and we need to basically discourage that kind of development. Thank you.
Thanks, Annette, and then Bob, and then Whitney.
Well, I just wanted to clarify my points. First of all, I totally believe in TDMs, and I think that we really need to look regionally at a Transportation Management Association. And I think that's the only way to do it, and put some money there. I was really struck by this. 2/3 of the drivers say they prefer to drive and plan on continuing on doing so. So I really think the comp plan addresses commuter parking, the 80,000 or so people that move around into our city. It does not address the 1,000 or 2,000 maybe of residents who have needs to drive around the city. And that's really what my concerns, and I wanted to clarify. I'm very concerned about that. Currently, the people I talk to just don't go down to downtown or Cal Ave. They're going to Mountain View. They're going to other places. They don't go to meetings, they're not volunteering for things because they can't find parking. And I think that's really an issue for residents, and I don't personally think the shuttles are going to cut it. So I did want to clarify, my thoughts are more to protect residents, and I support the TMA issues. My personal concern right now is residents that have more than 2 cars, or some people on my street have 4 cars or 5 cars in the 3-block area. And that is really a concern. So not only do we potentially have commuters that are just finding these nice places in neighborhoods, but you also have these people that have a lot of cars. I wish we could do something for that, and they park them all in the street. Nothing is ever parked in their driveway or even in their garage. So I don't know if we can address that in the comp plan, but I see that more and more and more with these very large houses and multiple generations of people that are living there. So.
Thank you, Annette, Bob. And then we have Whitney, Shani, and Lydia.
I agreeing with Annette. I liked your comments that you just made, and I think it's this strategy with parking to become a little bit more selfish for the Palo Altans and let the commuters sort of suffer their fate. But and this is a little bit where and maybe Jason, we're going with a bicycle thing. If we could, for that sector of the community that's Palo Altans, if we can really find a way to let people get to their location with alternate modes of transportation and carve out some spaces, that would be something I could get behind. Jeremy, I asked a question about the SCAP and I didn't hear an answer, but I understand it's coming out. It has a lot of policies and programs, I believe, in it. And what's the plan to manage that input when the SCAP comes out? Maybe it's not.
As it relates to the CAC, is that the question that you're asking?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, so let's say the SCAP has 20 new policies that it proposes that would come into the comprehensive plan, and it has a large focus on transportation. How do those policies that the SCAP might have, which I think are policies that look to me like they're comprehensive plan policies, how do we manage that?
I think it's potentially a larger conversation than I want to have tonight. I mean, the short answer on some of this is that I wanted to wait till everything was out and see how we do that and actually start having some sustainability subcommittee meetings where I think a lot of this work's going to be done. But I'd rather concentrate tonight on the transportation piece.
Well, no, let me just, the biggest part of the sustainability plan is transportation. So the sustainability and climate action plan speaks so broadly to transportation that I'm confused how a sustainability climate action plan that's speaking to transportation, that we can be talking about transportation in the comp plan without assimilating what that sustainability climate action plan. So it's a collision that I'm just trying to understand how we plan to manage. So it's not another element. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I'm following you. I don't have a short answer for you, and I want to preserve the 12 minutes we have for the remainder of the transportation discussion, and we can do it offline, if that's okay with you, Bob.
I guess it wasn't, but I'd have to just take it. Okay.
Well, I don't want to spend 5, 7, 8 minutes having a larger discussion around sustainability issues when we're just completing what we're doing right now. That's my preference. Thanks.
Whitney, Shani, Lydia, and then Elaine.
I just wanted, there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of reference to Stanford's TDM plan, and there's been a couple of inaccuracies. So I just wanted to take a second to talk about that. Stanford has actually had in the general use permit a requirement, this sort of no net new trip concept, actually since 1989. It isn't a new policy that was just put in place in the last couple of years, but it's something we've operated on under for quite a long time. In the 2000 GUP, which is the general use permit we operate under now, there is a requirement, this no net new trip concept. But if you don't meet it, it doesn't mean that Stanford, as Arthur said, it doesn't mean that we stop growing. That's inaccurate. What it does say is that if you don't meet it, you have to install some improvements to some selected road segments and to some intersections in Palo Alto. So Stanford actually chose to spend the money and resources to putting a big, robust TDM package together to get trips off the road, in essence, because it's the right thing to do, and I think it works well for the community. It does work well because there is a Caltrain station, and a lot of the employees at Stanford and students come by Caltrain. And we provide Go Passes for all of the employees. But then there's a big, robust TDM program that also goes along with it, and they're constantly testing out and seeing what works well. The thing how it applies, I think, and translates to the comp plan here is that it wasn't just a mandate, pick these two things and you'll get a lower SOV rate, but it is a really sort of ground up, really robust transportation program that's evolved over time, and Stanford's been able to modify that and manipulate it in order to try and reduce that SOV rate as much as possible. So it's sort of that it's not just the stick mechanism, but it is also the carrot mechanism, but it's allowing Stanford and that employer to really think about and really test what's best for the employees that come to Stanford. Like I said, they're doing the same kind of thing in the research park and starting to look at where employees come from, what's the demographic and whatnot, and looking at how that kind of program can be developed as well. So I just wanted to sort of clarify that inconsistency about the GUP.
Thank you, Whitney. Shani, Lydia, and then Elaine.
So I just have a few questions about, we didn't talk about the airport, we didn't talk about the ferry and the Baylands, other things that I think there's some consensus, but we didn't discuss them today. And I also was wondering about how what we're working on here is compatible with the sustainability plan. I know that's what Bob was asking. I would like to know as well. So maybe it's not for today, but I would like to have more information about that. And I don't see that we have a problem in South Palo Alto now, but knowing what's coming in Mountain View, because I follow what that city is planning, I know what's coming, and we have to be prepared, especially in the areas that are from here towards 101. And we need to think now whether there needs to be something in the general plan that anticipates this development. We are proposing to facilitate transportation to the other side of 101 by that bridge, and that's okay, we should do that. But we should also be prepared to what's going to happen to this area when we do that. And I don't want to see that in 5 or 10 years we go, oh God, we didn't think about it, because I am thinking about it, and it should be there. There should be something anticipating what happens when there is suddenly about 10,000 residents and another 3 to 3.5 million square feet of development at North Bayshore, and a lot more along San Antonio, and potentially more elsewhere. We need to be prepared for that.
Thank you. Lydia, Elaine, as our last speaker.
So I did want to talk about the Stanford TDM, and so I thank both Whitney and Arthur for clarifying it. However, it's not so much, it's great that it's successful, but most of its success is on campus. And I have community members who have come up to me and have informed me that there is parking in their neighborhoods from Stanford staff, student, faculty. I don't know who they are, but they're all walking or skateboarding or bicycling over to Stanford or to the train stations. So I don't know if I can say, so for me, it's very difficult for me to say, yes, it's a true success, because it's actually taking problems from one area to another area. And also to piggyback off what Shanae said, Mountain View is developing that part of their town with high density and so forth. But also, in Palo Alto itself, and it's moving south, Google has 9 properties in the East Meadow Concept Plan area. So what is going to happen to that, we don't know. But for one thing that we do know is that while we can't determine what growth is going to be in the future, we know human nature. And young folks are going to grow older, have children, they're going to bike today, but tomorrow they're going to have 3 kids that go different places, and they're not going to be able to bike to it. And at some point, we don't drive anymore because we're too old or our eyesight goes, whatever. We're going to revert back to going back to public transportation. And some of us are just not going to ride bicycles. So it has to be diverse and really common sense and sensible. Thank you.
Thank you. Elaine, our final speaker.
So I was just going to also mention the trip cap, because I think the TDM and a lot of the parking policies and programs we've been talking about really need to have that sort of stick applied first before we can really create an effective set of tools. And the other thing that hasn't been talked about tonight, but I just want to throw out, I think we've all recognized that parking is going to have to be solved on kind of a case-by-case custom basis, but we haven't talked a lot about area plans and prescribing parking policies and programs to a specific geographically bounded area. So like a downtown or, Cal Ave, or even just on the other side of that, like near Ventura. So I think absent from this conversation has been the area plan, the district level parking planning, and tying that to, the mix, the problems that are created by the mix of office, retail, and housing for that particular area. And so it would be great to actually have that kind of put back into the language around Goal T4 for parking. And I think people are right. We need to focus on the alternatives, because without the alternatives, you are not going to get that reduction in demand. And so I appreciate the mentions of the bike plans and networks, as well as the shuttle on the bus, because I think Mark is right that we can focus a lot of money on getting a better bus system for the money that we would have to spend building a parking garage. And Jason's right about really building out that bike network. So internally, a lot more of us, and even other people who come into our city or pass through our city, feel safe going through without a car. Thanks.
Gloria, do you have a short last word? Okay. All right, that's going to wrap us up here. May I hear a motion to approve the minutes that were in our packet?
So moved.
And a second from Arthur moving. A second from Amy. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That's a negative.
Pass unanimously.
Or unanimously, thank you. We have one more thing to do before we excuse ourselves. And Robin, would you bring out a cake for Jeremy, please?
So you can have your cake and eat it too. I can tonight, apparently.
All right, we will, may I have a motion to adjourn? By Annette and seconded by?
I'll
By
second.
Don.
And we should adjourn in the acknowledgement and thanks to Jeremy for all his hard work. And to thank Elena for working for us and taking on the ball because she's going to have a lot more work to do, and we thank her for
Not leaving.
Not leaving.
Well, so I get to do this before you adjourn. So, and this is ridiculous. This cake is crazy. This is a fantastic group. And the reason it's a fantastic group is, there I am, look, Amy's taking a picture, hi. Is because of your difference of opinion on a variety of issues. But if you were able to sit back and watch tonight's discussion as an observer, as I was able to, you guys are doing exactly what you're supposed to do, and you did it in a polite, courteous, informative way. And this is a testament to all of you. This is going to be a better product because of it. So, I know I've only been here a few short months, but I've appreciated being here. I hope I've been helpful. Come to Portola Valley. There's all kinds of things going on there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.